Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Chess.com Junior Speed Chess Championship. We have an amazing match for you guys today between Grandmasters Nihal Sarin and Andrew Tang. I'm Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and it is my pleasure to be commentating today with FIDE Master Mike Klein. Mike, how has your morning been? Are you as excited as I am for this match?
Yeah, I don't know how I got chosen for what I think is going to be the most exciting opening round match, so I hope to not disappoint. But I would have watched this one as a fan anyway, which means I would not have been productive. So I guess my bosses figured they might as well hire me. So the #1 seed against the top KO qualifier, I couldn't ask for much more.
Absolutely. Well, we all know you're awesome, Mike, so I think we all know why you were chosen. Well, before we jump into the action, let's take a quick look at the bracket, and I am going to force you to make some predictions because you are the nominated Nostradamus. So we have just so many mouthwatering names. Mike, anything catches your eye from these first rounds? Any particular players that you think we should watch?
Well, what captured my eye was actually the country of origin of the players. We've got 5 Indians, 3 Americans, 2 Russians, and 2 Iranians. That's kind of a different balance of power than I might have expected. Unfortunately for the 2 Russians, they seem to be playing each other. Now, as far as predictions, I'm a little bit hesitant because, first of all, I don't want to look silly. But also, if there's one thing they teach you in journalism school, it's, try to keep your impartiality. So can I let you know in 3 hours who's a favorite in this match? Is that okay?
That's fine, but I think we already have a model that is ready. So it is too late.
That's true. Now, this is a statistical model, but as you can see, we've got... well, the #1 seed is actually seemingly going to be the favorite statistic.
Oh, I can't believe that. Can you believe the number? Wait, let me get that straight again. #1 seed. Well, we have Nihal Sarin. He is, of course, an absolute beast, but we will get into that. But all of these other names, I mean, Martirosyan, Maksud Liu, they are not only amazing chess players, but blitz and bullet juggernauts. So, I mean, this is obviously going to be very, very close. So this
if you take a look at it. One of the predictions is for Sevian to get to the finals. I'm not sure Sevian gets past the first round. I think that's one of the nice things about the Junior Speed Chess Championship. Not that the regular Speed Chess Championship is not worth watching, but 1 versus 16 matchups in the regular Speed Chess Championship are usually just Magnus toying with somebody, Ricardo toying with somebody.
Right, exactly. But we will, yeah, incredible. Yeah. Well, let's take a quick look at the format and some of the logistics so everyone is on board. We have, of course, 16 players. Each match consists of 3 hours, and we have a 90-minute segment of 5+1, as with most Speed Chess Championship matches, 60 minutes of 3+1 and 30 minutes of bullet. Everything played with a 1-second increment, and that is pretty much standard fare.
Yeah.
Mike, any thoughts about that?
Well, the increment, I think, probably negatively affects Tang because Tang plays hyper bullet. In fact, is there something called ultra bullet? I just had to learn what the term was for 15-second chess. 30-second chess is already a bit of a weird thing. But so Tang is probably negatively impacted by that. But Sarin is also so fast as well. I wonder, could we allow the players to mutually agree to abandon the 1-second increment if they both so choose?
I think neither will be against it, to be completely honest with you, Mike. Yeah, they're so incredibly fast, both of them, in their own way. And, people might be a little bit more familiar with Andrew's speed, but Nihal is, well, as of a couple of days ago, he was #1 on Chess.com bullet with over 3,200. I shudder to think what his rating is now with the update. So he is, and I've played him many times myself, he's incredibly strong. So this is actually going to be very, very close. And we are about to have liftoff here any second. Now, not to say the 5-minute section is going to be boring. They're also both very, very strong players, Mike.
Yeah, in fact, Nihal was a mere FM a couple of years ago when I interviewed him at the Isle of Man tournament. And everybody was saying, Prague was getting a lot of attention, but everybody was saying, keep your eye on Nihal. And I'm a historically horrible judge of talent. But those people, of course, were not wrong. He didn't actually beat his first GM until 4 years ago. Which is a little strange to, wait till you're 12 years old to beat your first GM over the board. But of course, now he is one himself. He is the #1 seed in the tournament. I'm curious, Danya, is he the #1 classically rated player as well? I know he's the #1 seed, but that's based on some blitz and bullet ratings.
Right. And by the way, we do now have liftoff. And I actually think, is Maksud Liu maybe higher, a little bit higher rated? What exactly is Nihal's FIDE? Is he over 2650 as we have a very fashionable line of the Queen's Gambit here on the board.
I'll look that up for you, but since we're right into the action, we will get
Absolutely.
to it. Looks
Yeah,
like
we have
Go ahead.
Queen's Gambit, sort of close, popular stuff nowadays.
Yeah. Do you think players are a little more conservative in the opening round matches? I mean, the fact that White has already gotten rid of the tension with C4, C5, is it like the worst thing in the world to lose your first game as White, and that's why you might see this move?
It definitely, I mean, I've noticed this commentating a lot of these matches. There is this, you begin conservative. You definitely don't want to jump out to a 3-0, 4-0 deficit that is crushing. And so we see Nihal is a jack of all trades. I've seen him play literally everything under the sun. And that, I think, is a hallmark, Mike, of young players these days. They used to have a narrow repertoire. I remember when I was growing up, I was only playing one opening. Nowadays, they're playing everything, and they're playing everything at an increasingly young age. I kind of like White's position here in the early going with this pawn on c6 being as strong as it is. White can consider just bishop d3, knight e5. Something tells me this is still theory, and I'm completely out of date, but I do like what Nihal is doing here.
I hope we get different openings. I just got done in July being the commentator for the Chess Kid Youth Speed Chess Championship, 10 years and younger. And those kids would get trained on one opening and play it for 3 hours. Well, actually, the matches were only 2. And nothing against them. They're going to have more limited repertoires when they're 10. So the nice thing is today, when they play an opening that I know nothing about, I probably won't see it again. So I'll only have to be stupid for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I actually wonder if it's going to be one of those matches where they play the same thing every single game, or they vary. So Andrew settling into a thing here. He's got some problems to solve. This pawn on c6 is like a splinter in Black's position. One thing to consider here would be bishop a6, trying to lighten the load. He goes a4, so he limits White's ability to push his pawns on the queen side. Now bishop e5 here, I'm like, that looks pretty scary to me. Maybe Andrew wants to meet it with something like bishop a6, something to this effect, but then White can just capture on a4. The idea of bishop a6 being to stop White from castling, but this definitely doesn't work. Right off the bat, I'm not seeing anything wrong with bishop b5.
Yeah, I think the reason Black played a4 was because if b4 was allowed to happen and then the pawn got to b5 as well, if Black could never accomplish the e5 break, Black's playing without a piece. So you've got to play a4 to be able to take en passant, to always at least be able to trade bishops on a6 at the very least.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about this, it occurs to me that maybe bishop b2. That was a mouse slip by me. I think bishop b5, rook a5 maybe. With that same idea, bishop takes a4, bishop a6. Like, I'm trying to stop White from castling, but here, look at this rook on a5. It gets snapped off by that pawn. So maybe Nihal trying to figure out what is wrong with bishop e5, but Andrew is such a tricky player. He usually has something in mind.
Yeah, now if you play bishop b5 and then you get your queen onto the same diagonal, then essentially what you're trying to do is play an entire game based on one bad piece. And to borrow a phrase from Grandmaster Sam Palatnik, the bishop on c8, and I apologize for the first Russian accent, is a sick buffalo. And when you have a sick buffalo, it makes the whole herd sick. I don't mean to get too close to our present pandemic. This is something Palatnik was saying well before coronavirus. But when you make one piece bad, it can often ruin an entire position. And this is going to inhibit all of Black's development if the bishop on c8 doesn't find a home.
No, I mean, your Russian accent was very good, Mike. I approve very much. Yes, okay. But okay, what does Andrew Tang do in this position? Because it takes a4. Yeah, I mean, the question is really, maybe Black doesn't do anything and he waits for White to take on a4 and then goes bishop a6 and again tries to prevent White from castling. That seems to me to be the only thing that Black can do to compensate. Maybe something like knight e8, try to get this knight to d6. Now, this does not look good to me, and something definitely has gone wrong here in the opening for Andrew, as he is burning into his clock, using up almost half of it now by move 13.
And what I would ask you is, does White even want the pawn? Or does White just want to control the diagonal leading to a6?
I think he just wants to control that diagonal. I mean, and the thing is, the terrifying thing is, White will not even have to rush taking on a4. As you say, he can castle first and lessen the impact of Black's control over that diagonal. I mean, is Black just lost here? I'm just struggling to understand, what Andrew can even do here.
You know what's funny, Danya? It's time for me to record my next Chess Kid video, and there's not many topics I haven't covered yet, but wedge pawns is a topic I've not covered. And I'm just going to take a little note about this position because I need fodder for my videos. And I think that C6 pawn counts as a wedge pawn.
Very interesting. That's one of those concepts, Mike, that's not often talked about, but can be the secret sauce in a lot of positions. I like it. I approve, not that anybody cares, but I approve of the video. So here we have rook a5, Andrew settling on it. Nihal, again, trying to figure out, is anything wrong with just taking the pawn? Maybe Andrew can try to liberate his position a little bit with b5 and b4. And if you take on b4, well, then I take with check, and then I can play that favorite move of ours, bishop a6. So maybe that's the idea. And Nihal definitely, there's some, oh, he takes, and we have b5. So the thing is, white can drop his bishop back and castle and give back the extra pawn. That is also something to consider. Let's see what Nihal does here.
I wonder if bishop b3, b4, if white plays a4 and just says, I'm going to try to win every endgame that ever existed, but he still loses control of the diagonal.
No, I love that, though, because maybe now you could swing your knight around to d3, use the knight as a blockader, and then castle. Not that it's that important to castle. It's not like black has a raging attack here, but we have some action. Yeah, we have bishop c2, b4. You could still go a4 and redirect the bishop to d3, but you'd have to be careful about not losing the a4 pawn in that case. So some problems to solve for sure for Nihal. A4, bishop a6, and then, again, he's not in a big hurry, so maybe he doesn't even need to castle that quickly.
Funny comment in the chat, Nihal may be sleepy. It is hard to accommodate a time that works for both the central US time zone and the Indian time zone. So I don't think it's that late in India, though, although that is one piece of intel that I did not do before the match. It looks like it's about 9:30 in India. So I don't know Nihal's sleep schedule, but I don't think that's too late for most 16.
No, I don't think so. I think this is when he starts his blitz sessions on Chess.com. But speaking of the times, I always had this problem with my chess coaches because they were always in Europe, somewhere in Europe. And so it was usually at my morning and their evening. Let's just say I'm not a morning person. And let's just say I had some angry coaches. I'll share some stories later, Mike, but that was never fun for me, even as a kid.
Well,
wow, so Nihal dipping, by the way, below a minute almost.
Yeah, I do like what black has done here, because if there's one thing I've learned about playing strong grandmasters is that you can't allow them every trump in the position. You have to do something to free your position. So the fact that black has offered a pawn to get activity is a no-brainer. You just can't allow yourself to get overwhelmed slowly.
Yeah, you simply cannot be biding your time. You have to do something. Now, if white goes a4, I think what is... I need to change my mouse. This has been happening now in my bullet games. And white goes b3. Maybe what Nihal's worried about is this knight swinging over to c3. I'm not sure that's truly something to worry about, but maybe Nihal is trying to, not allow any kind of counterplay, and he does end up castling, so something he didn't like there. Now, I still think he's better, Mike. As you mentioned, this wedge pawn definitely gives him an advantage. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah, probably easier, though, to give the pawn back and play this position with 40 seconds left, rather than having to worry about, okay, when the knight comes to c3, how do I manage my position? So maybe he just bailed out and said, I can't be worse in this position. I can play it more quickly with 40 seconds left.
Right, and now another decision for Andrew. Which piece does he take the pawn with? If you take with the bishop, you might get pinned. So from that perspective, maybe you take with the rook. Now, not that pin is so scary. Maybe you go after this. Maybe you play bishop a6 first and try to gain a tempo. That does seem pretty reasonable. I'm not sure I love Nihal's decision, to be honest, of giving this pawn back. And here we do have bishop a6, bishop d3. White is always going to be better in endgames because of this pawn, but with every trade, it seems to me that the load on black's position is lessened, Mike.
Yeah, now the c7 pawn is starting to become a thought in white's idea. And of course, the c7 pawn is basically the game, because if you get a pawn on c6 that's unrivaled, it's going to be hard to stop.
Right, completely agree. Maybe 95, queen b7 here for white. This is going to be a time scramble. They are both now at 30 seconds. And is this a surprise to anyone? And the increment, though, Mike, is going to introduce definite nuance into these time scrambles, as we've seen before.
By the way, if we were to reconstruct this match as a straight up 1 minute bullet match, no increment, would Tang be a going away favorite? Or, he's so much more well known than Sarin, but I think you know a little bit more about Nihal's skills. So they do have an increment, but in a pretend world where they don't, who would be the favorite?
I would have to go with Andrew. Now, take this with a grain of salt. It's so close. They're both so incredibly strong. But to me, Andrew seems just a little bit more experienced in those time scrambles and a little bit faster. And I think that would impact positively. Now, here we see Nihal 10 seconds to 19 from Andrew. So let's watch as this game comes to its conclusion. We have Andrew activating his pieces, rook c3 to be considered. There's queen tension, and Nihal grabs the queen. Now he can try to go after the c pawn with rook b7. He's got 7 seconds. This is where the respective internet service providers start to get a little bit nervous. g5. Okay. Do we have a fizzling out here again? I think white's better, Mike. He can go knight c5. 2 seconds. Got to make a move, though. Oh, this
I was actually wondering if you could play rook b7 there as a sacrifice, because it was hard to guard the c7 pawn, but I don't think it was worth the risk.
Maybe knight d7 too. Knight b7 also. That b7 square, I like that idea, but he's doubling on the b file. Maybe he's preparing that sacrifice. 3 seconds. Andrew going knight c4, going after the pawn. Rook b7. Okay. Now rook c1. 2 seconds of the clock. He's won the pawn, but he has knight takes c6. e4. Definitely Nihal pushing here. This is so hard to play for Andrew. Rook e7. He's trying to hunker down. Knight coming around to b4. What is going on here? Andrew trying to hold this together.
d5 looks like it's going down.
It is, but now he's going to go rook a2. Rook d7 check on rook g1 though. Oh, he pre-moved badly. Now it takes in king e7. He didn't expect that.
It wasn't the worst pre-move in the world.
Definitely not. I've seen worse, but this might be a draw now. Now Andrew's the one pushing. He's got the active rook. He has got the active rook. Now Nihal has to be careful with 1 second on the clock, but this should be a draw, Mike. Rook on e5, and we have fizzle out here and a draw.
Yep, and let's see if they agree to it. If they try to blitz each other with a 1 second increment, it doesn't make much sense to try to blitz each other.
Exactly, and we have piece. It appears, well, king f7 would not make sense. That would blunder the pawn with check. We have a draw in the first game, and wow, it seems to me that Nihal definitely had that opportunity in the opening. Maybe that idea to castle was a little bit on the conservative side and didn't make the most out of the advantage, but nothing disastrous for him, obviously.
Yeah, and not so bad for white. You pushed, you were the aggressor, but you got a little short on time and you bailed out. And I think it was a managed game. It wasn't a game where white took undue risks.
Right, I completely agree. And it's so early in the match. Here we have a Nimzo Indian with Andrew's queen c2. Now, I brought this up in the qualifiers. Andrew is someone who, and we discussed this with Nihal, but Andrew always plays the same stuff. He plays his classical repertoire, even in Blitz and Bullet, which has its positives and negatives. He knows it very well, but it is easy to prepare against, including this queen c2 Nimzo. He plays this exclusively. He's played it against me a million times. And Nihal choosing an interesting line where his queen has come out to f5. Again, we have a pawn on a4. That pawn is weak. If you bring the bishop back, white could consider snagging it, but white's king side is undeveloped. So this looks like a pretty sharp position and a decision to be made now by Nihal.
And I was listening to your broadcast with Robert Hess on the qualifier, on the knockout qualifier, where you said that some players prepare heavily for these online blitz matches and some kind of don't. They just, they may have a loose idea what they want to do. I don't take Nihal as being a wing it type player. I take Nihal as being a player who probably did heavily invest some time into Andrew's limited opening repertoire and come up with some systems he wanted to play against it.
Yeah, definitely. He's very methodical. He plays, well-prepared stuff. But at the end of the day, Andrew's just extremely deep knowledge of his lines might come in handy. So we see bishop d6 played. And now a decision to be made by Andrew. Does he take the pawn? I would say no because of knight e4. This just seems a little bit fishy to me. Maybe you just go e3 and then bishop d3. And I feel like white is probably slightly better here. I mean, honestly, with the possibility of going e4. Black, on the other hand, he can try to break through on his own with e5. So we'll see how this happens.
I think I see why this fails, but can you tell the fans why e4, knight takes e4, bishop d3 does not work? Although it looks tempting, I think there's a foil, but maybe you can show everybody what that is.
Absolutely. But before I do, a quick reminder of the schedule as we work on a very quick technical fix. It seems that there's a bit of an issue with the eval bar, so we'll remove it for now. We apologize. But just to remind people, right now is, of course, the beginning of the main bracket, which lasts almost a month to October 5th. And the final is on October 8th at 9 a.m. Pacific. So capture that day in your calendars right now, because it is going to be whoever is going to be playing, Mike, it's going to be epic, as we already see from this match. And we have action heating up in this game. We apologize for the technical glitch. I'm not sure what the issue is, but hopefully you'll have to put your trust in the hands of me and Mike. I know that's terrible, but we ask for your understanding.
You are the eval bar, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm not sure everybody in chat shares that belief, but I've been playing decently the last couple of days. So give me a chance. Give me a chance. Okay, so we have queen c2 on the board, the queen hunting for this pawn. But wait a minute, is that queen going to get in trouble? There's one line I see, e3 takes, rook b1. And if the queen starts lining its pockets, you have knight b5 and the queen is trapped. So Nihal is playing with fire here. What does he want after e3? Maybe knight a5 involving the knight, not sure. Definite stuff to calculate here for Andrew. And Andrew has gone queen a2.
Yeah, the B pawn is the classic poisoned pawn, but there must have been something he didn't like about allowing the queen to capture it, because you're putting your queen in an awfully defensive spot and you're relieving black of any need to ever guard the a4 pawn.
That's exactly right. So kind of a moral victory there for Nihal. Does he go e5 now? This might be the window of opportunity, but whoa, Mike, after rook c1, queen g6, white can go knight h4, and the queen is trapped again on g6. So still, he's got to be careful. So maybe he goes queen b3 there, but then we might have the case of a weak pawn or another wedge on b3. So Nihal's definitely calculating that. I can guarantee he's calculating e5 right now. There are alternatives. He can, well, are there alternatives? I don't know, maybe knight e4. Very, very sharp position here.
And I would expect them to labor out of the opening because, you know, people often say chess players are great at pattern recognition, but only patterns that we know of. There aren't very many games. Your queen's on a2. There's a black queen on c2 where she can get trapped on different wings of the board. There's a pawn on g4. So just like I'm struggling to come up with familiar patterns in this position, the players are probably needing to make sure too, because these queen traps are coming out of nowhere.
They really are. And you bring up a great point, which is the more unconventional the position, the harder it is to detect these things, and the more thinking time is required. As we see again, by move 13, Nihal has dipped below half of his time used, and Andrew also at 2 minutes 44 seconds. So a lot to think about here in the opening. Now I'm looking at this position. I'm wondering what else there is other than e5. This move knight e4. The point is, after rook c1, you can take the knight on c3, counterattacking white's queen. You can't take back with a pawn because of the pin. You can't take with a bishop because the rook is hanging. So white does drop a piece here. So this might be one way to ensure better queen safety, but it comes at the cost of not liberating that bishop. And we have knight a5. So Nihal choosing to direct his knight to b3, or is he securing potentially that square for his queen? Rook c1 now will force queen b3.
And I've got a new best friend, user B Handelman in the Chess.com TV chat says, I trust Mike, not sure about Danya. I'm not sure about your honesty there, but somebody's looking for some sort of premium membership that I'm not giving away. But you got your name announced on air. That's probably what you're going for.
That, yeah, you sniffed that right out. So we have e3 now. So we have, again, the tension between the queens. Does Nihal capture the queen? I don't think there's any need to do that immediately. Yeah, as we see him just developing, bishop comes to c. I quite like what he's, no, that bishop is not going to come to b6. I quite like what he's chosen here, directing that bishop to c6 to the long diagonal. Mike, your earlier recommendation of going e4, I kind of like that more. I feel like black is getting the upper hand here bit by bit.
Yeah, I'm just not used to positions where your pawn's on g4, and I'm trying to figure out how that relates to my evaluation of the position. I could even see a situation where white plays queen b1, intentionally avoiding the trade because the black queen is going to be vulnerable in some ways when the light squared bishop finds activity. I'm not sure if we'll find a third way to trap the black queen one day, but it could happen.
Maybe on b3, but I've shown a sample line. Definitely we could see a way that this could backfire. But yeah, this might be the best that white can do. Now, Andrew with 1 minute, that is just going to be the narrative. We're going to see a lot of time scrambles in this match. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I'm guessing also, Danya, both players are more comfortable draining their clock down to 30 seconds because of both their skills and their experience playing games that have less than 1 minute to start the time.
Yeah, they're just so used to it. And is it sort of a compulsion to do it? I think at some point there is a certain rush, and I can attest to that comes with not having any time by move 16 and playing on increment. There is a certain adrenaline rush that awakens in you. Not that you do it deliberately, but there might be a little bit of that at play.
Yeah,
So
but you know what?
Mm-hmm.
We all have friends in life that always seem to be the ones that get themselves into dramatic situations. And at some point, you're like, this person is seeking out the drama. And so
that is so true.
Chess, yeah.
That is very true. And we have bishop coming to c6 as we expected. Now, probably castles to be expected here from Penguin. And when I say Penguin, he's so known by that moniker now, I feel very comfortable just saying that. It doesn't sound weird. That's what he's always been.
By the way, how does Tatev feel about the number one Penguin being Andrew? Because, Tatev's got a big attachment to the Penguin name as well.
That is true now that I think about it. Well, I don't know. If we bring in Tatev, we've got to bring my brother. He's a big fan of Penguins as well. Okay. I'm sure he's watching the broadcast right now. He is terribly offended. But, we got to give Andrew some credit. He is, after all, a wizard. But he is in trouble here. 25 seconds. Look at Nihal laying it on now. Knight c4, threatening the b2 pawn. Now, if you take on c4, you're going to have big problems with this knight on f3. So that's out of the question. And we have knight to d1, bringing the knight back. Now, Andrew trying his best to ward off this attack.
Yeah, knight takes d2. You have to take with the king, or can you take with the knight?
Maybe
and get away
you
with
can take with a knight because you hit the queen.
And then no useful move.
Castle. Now, black is still doing fine here. But I wouldn't do that if I were Nihal. I would try to find a way to keep this knight on c4, maybe go b5, but then we might have that third wave trapping the queen on this time on d5, on b3. It might escape to d5, but then you have bishop f3 and win with the bishop. Amazing.
What if the knight takes d2, knight takes, and the queen relocates to d5, not b6, like a more active square?
But then you still might have that bishop f3 move.
Got it. Yeah.
And then you might root out that bishop. So... Okay. I don't see exactly a good move for Nihal here, and apparently neither does he, because he now has dipped below 30 seconds. And maybe the best that he can do is, in fact, to take on d2, drop the queen back, and save some time. He's taken on f3, which does make sense, because if bishop takes f3, he can force white's king out to d2, which is something you hit on, Mike. But we have now e5, so he's opening up the center, trying to exploit the weakness of this king. 10 seconds out for Andrew, and buckle your seatbelts. We have another time scramble on our hands.
Yeah, white needs to find a safe file for the king. I'm not sure which one he wants.
Queen to c2. He's trying to trade queens. Nihal could take on d4. He's still better in the endgame, but queen b6, keeping the queens. And Andrew, okay, now he drops his king back, maybe evacuates it to g2. I don't think he's actually much worse if he manages to do that. Amazing. He's brought the king out. He's tasted fire, but then now he's bringing it to the king side. c6, defending the pawns, bringing the knight back out. Andrew's doing fine, all things considered. Rook a5 might be considered. Nihal trying to stop him from coming to the king side.
And the king's going to get to g2, just like you said, Danya, and looks reasonably safe.
Take on c3 maybe, and then come to d2 at the end. Nihal biding his time, knight to d5. We have more trades. Will we have another draw?
And opposite colored bishops usually favors the attacker. Queen g6 is an idea, but it's just an idea at the moment. It doesn't do anything.
But now rook d7, you kind of called it. What does Nihal do? 3 seconds, rook d7, and the tables have turned. Bishop f7. Okay, very good move by Nihal, trying to trade queens.
Take with the rook is better.
You can't take the queen.
Attack.
Is it going to be mate? Bishop d3 is mate. It's mate if he checks on d3. Will he see it? He does. Wow. What a turn of the tables. And Andrew defending and then finding the opportunity to jump onto the attack. And now with a 1-point lead. Amazing stuff, Mike.
Yeah, that was great. And then a perfect example of how when you get to the middle game with opposite colored bishops, it's like having an extra piece in the attack. And because of the nature of black's pawns, the f7 pawn was easily attackable, but white had pawns on f2 and e3, which made the black's dark squared bishop not terribly useful in any attack on the white king. That's not one of those features you have even time to consider, basically, when you're in a time scramble, but that's playing with fire. That's what happens when you get down to these positions with 10 seconds left. You don't really have time to figure out who's going to be favored in those types of positions.
Exactly. And you bring up a good point here. When you're on the defensive and you have to deal with concrete threats, that can be one of the hardest things to do in time pressure. And I guess our question about whether openings would be repeated, well, it seems to be answered here. We have another one of these queen get, but Andrew will definitely have to change what he did in the opening. Right now, they're still repeating all of the same moves, Mike. I'm a little bit surprised.
Yeah, and it's way too early to call this, but if you're looking for a historical, since you're a history major, Danya, a historical time where a 16 beat a 1, well, it's only happened once in the history of the NCAA basketball tournament, and it just so happened to be a school that's more known for its chess championships. That's University of Maryland, Baltimore County, as a 16 seed, beat Virginia, and this is a true story. In the locker room, the basketball players were asked about this historic moment, and they said, well, we're just trying to keep up with our school's chess team because University
Really?
of Maryland, Baltimore County, yep, they won a couple of national collegiate titles. And so chess has sort of paved the way in a weird way for 16 seeds to beat number 1 seeds.
Incredible story. Wow. And
Yeah,
it
how
all
often
comes together.
Yeah. There's actually another way that 3 of the 4 people on this call are related. Danya and I are both broadcasting from Charlotte, and Andrew Tang got his final Grandmaster norm in Charlotte. So forget what Copernicus said, the center of the universe is Charlotte.
It absolutely is. I can totally confirm that. And wow, I can't get my head, but that is a really, really cool stat. Of course, the sports upset that is closest to my heart is when the Golden State Warriors, I, of course, am from the Bay Area. Of course, best wishes to everyone right now in the Bay Area, suffering through very, very tough conditions with the fires. But I do remember when the Warriors beat the Mavs in the first round of the playoffs. I think it was 2007, and the Warriors were the 8th seed. Mavs were the top seed. And I think that was one of the only times in NBA history. I'm just trying to one-up you, Mike, with my stats, but I don't think I ever will. That was really cool. Well, now, what else is really cool is the pressure that Nihal is putting on Black's position. Yeah.
I'll just close this, Danya, by saying Steph Curry is from Charlotte, but let's get back to chess.
He is from Charlotte. That's true. He went to Davidson. In any case, so 95, and again, White putting pressure on Black's position this night, potentially coming to D7. It's a different kind of pressure. This time, Andrew is not struggling with the weakness of the A pawn, nor is he trying to prevent White from castling. But I mean, maybe I'm not understanding something, but to me, these positions are so hard to play, especially in blitz. I know this line is popular, but it's like I get so cramped.
Yeah, and the chances of the A4 pawn being weak are several orders of magnitude higher than the C6 pawn being weak. And the pawn on A4 is only there to stop the white pawn from B2 from moving, whereas the pawn on C6 serves all kinds of functions, limiting play, the potential to become a passed pawn if C7 becomes weak. So if we just isolate those 2 pawns, we have to say you don't often compare a C pawn to an A pawn, but White's C pawn has so much more utility than Black's A pawn.
That's exactly right. And we see Andrew hunting for this knight on E5. Nihal could consider something like knight to D7 here, which has its own complicated sort of ramifications. He has taken on A6 first, so he's lessened some of the tension. Now, Andrew's probably briefly considering taking on E5 as an intermediate move. I'm not liking that move necessarily. Maybe bishop B7, and then we have to consider this line with some potential sacks on H2. So there is something to consider here. And if you take on A6, maybe Nihal just wants to push out Black's knight, and this rook on A6 is undefended. That could breed some tactics, something like Queen D3. So again, White is definitely better here, and Andrew does go for bishop takes E5. Very interesting decision here, and now the ball is in Nihal's court. Does he go for this line, bishop B7, and bishop takes A8? With a lot of complexity here. Maybe Andrew just wants to draw his bishop back and go on the counterattack. A little bit skeptical about that, Mike, but maybe he sees something there.
I was trying to make that line work for Black as well, but once White's G2 pawn gets to G3, I don't see how you break through, because White's queen is very close to the king's side as well. Unless there's a double sacrifice on G3, but then really you're just going for a draw.
Right, and I could actually not take the bishop and go like Queen E2. That's exactly right. So I'm a little bit puzzled as to what Andrew has in mind. One thing he might be considering is to take on E3 and just say, okay, I'm going to give up the exchange, but I'm going to have this beautiful knight on E4. And Nihal, whatever it is, Nihal didn't like the look of it. He goes for bishop takes C5. Alternatively, he could have Queen G4. Okay, so now he could have just said, here I have the initiative. I'm safe, threatening checkmate, either forcing Black's knight back or forcing Black to make a big weakness on the king side with G6.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen the imbalance of the exchange sacrifice. In fact, Andrew Tang once played Magnus Carlsen over the board at the World Rapid Championship, and Magnus sacrificed an exchange against Andrew in a beautiful game. So maybe I'm drawing a little bit of a forced parallel there, but I'm hoping to see a little bit of imbalance today, and we'll see if that comes about in any future game.
Yeah, and we do have. Is it an imbalance to say bishop against knight? Is that considered an imbalance? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think it's called the minor exchange by Kasparov, right? Bishop for knight.
The minor exchange.
Yeah,
Wow,
I think he
that
had
is
some
a very
term.
memorable. Kasparov. Well, you wouldn't, happen to be playing anymore. But in any case, we have Andrew dropping his knight back to e8, and the knight actually covers 2 pawns at once. Now, we had a Romanian grandmaster, Mihai Shuba, I think, had this famous quote that bad bishops defend good pawns. Well, here we kind of have a case of a bad knight defending good pawns. Well, I don't even think these pawns are good either, so forget I said it, okay? Just forget it. Strike it off the record. But I think white is better. White is the one calling the shots here. The problem with these positions is they're very locked up. What exactly is Nihal's plan? Does he go e4 and open up the center? Does he sort of try to make marginal improvements, moves like h3, play it Russian school of chess, slowly boa constrictor? What do you think?
I was going to try to play e4. I wanted to play f4, f5, but f4 fails to f6, and you don't want to do that.
Right, the bishop is trapped.
So yeah, maybe you have no files for your rooks, and rooks hate pawns, as we say in Chess Kid land. So putting a rook behind the e pawn and advancing it to open up the position a little bit for your bishop would be sort of baseline chess what you're supposed to do.
Right. Nihal taking the slower rook push. He actually trades on d6. Whoa, that surprises me a little bit. That bishop was the main instrument of pressuring that pawn. I feel like Andrew is breathing a bit of a sigh of relief after this. Now, maybe white is still better. White can still try to prepare e4 at his convenience, but now he's got to be careful about this c6 pawn because it could easily turn from a strength into a weakness. Andrew could consider just going f5 and stopping e4 altogether now that the e5 square is, yes, it is weak, but in name only, white has nothing to occupy it with.
Yeah, and you just made the first point about the wedge pawn potentially becoming a weakness, which if I ever made a Chess Kid video, we'd have to talk about. The closer you get to an endgame, the space advantage means less and less. And the fact that the c6 pawn, it's not isolated by the strictest definition of the chess word isolated, but for all intents and purposes, it can't be guarded by a pawn, and it just becomes weaker and weaker. If we swap the queens, black's king will just march to d6, and you'll be stuck using a rook to guard the pawn forever. It'll probably be lost in a matter of 5 or 10 more moves. It'll take some time, but it'll be lost.
Yeah, and that would be one of those endgames they show to Russian school children. This style positional Russian school of chess. Like when people refer to the Russian school of chess, I think playing these kinds of positions very well is one of the hallmarks of it. Even though there is no building that is, and that's one of the misconceptions that people have when they think of that word, the Russian school of chess. They think of a stately building in Moscow. There's no building, there's no literal institution. But it's more, I would say, like a style of coaching and a style of play. Now here, okay, so he's redirecting his queen to a6, but now Andrew has to be very careful. That queen might be stranded, and this might be a good chance to make stuff happen. Weakening black's king side is Nihal. Maybe e4 here, maybe quickly go rook e1 and e4. So he's got a decision to make. I think if he doesn't go e4 now, he won't have another good chance. Rook b5. Okay, now he's defending the pawn. Maybe swinging the rook to b3. What is going on here? But Andrew dipping low on the clock, Mike.
Yeah, again, the fewer pieces on the board, the more c6 becomes the most important part of the position and its weakness.
But something else that has to be said for this pawn on a4, black's rook is kind of tied to it again. I feel like Nihal, they're playing this cat and mouse game. He keeps trying to decide, should I play e4? And Andrew plays e5. Wow. I don't know about that. He's opening up the position. So if you take on e5, maybe he'll take back with the pawn. He is using this pawn on f6 to his advantage. Now, Nihal with the decision, does he keep things closed with something like rook d2? Andrew might drive that wedge into e4. I don't think that bothers Nihal. I just think this might be a draw if he allows it to happen. But I'm not sure it's a good idea to take on e5.
You've played a ton of online blitz matches. If you're white here, would you ever take into account the clock situation in your actual move decision-making at this point?
Not with Andrew. I've done this so many times. I think there's no way, even with increment, there's no way he's going to make it. Andrew, even with no increment with 10 seconds, it can play a very accurate rook endgame. So I would play something measured. He does take, though. Okay, so maybe he wants to go after this pawn on d5. But this took Nihal a lot of time in his own right. Now they're about equal on the clock. Queen to e6, defending the pawn, pressuring c6. What to do for white? Maybe queen to g3. Okay, Nihal dropping his rook back. I think it's still about balanced. I don't think either side has a measurable advantage. I do like what Andrew has done here. Now he seems to be the one with the initiative. Maybe get this rook back to a8, stopping a potential check on d8. Okay, he locks the queen in with rook g5. Does Nihal play f4? That seems very risky. Again, let's buckle in and watch things happen here.
Strange position where the black rooks are not working together, yet they both seem to be doing more than the white counterparts.
Exactly. They're both on the fifth rank, but somehow, as you say, well, now Nihal trying to remedy that situation, pressuring d5, maybe queen to h1. He does. Rook to h5, rook takes h5. Now attacking
Alpha Zero-esque right there.
Indeed. But e4 locks the queen into g2. Now he's got that blockading square. 3 seconds for Nihal. He's definitely worse. Now he wins another pawn. Things are spinning out of control. Andrew going rook f6. He's threatening rook takes f2.
Yeah, Alekine's gun coming. There it is.
Oh, look at this. This is turned around completely. And indeed, white has lost that c6 pawn. Andrew pressuring on the king side. h4. Look at that defense, shutting white down completely. This is mastery by Andrew, and he's got a lot more time as well. Only a miracle. Oh, he had rook takes c6 there, actually. Maybe. Okay, h4, and this just seems to be okay. Nihal trying to complicate things. That's actually a really good move. Exploiting this undefended rook. Andrew definitely missed that. And if h takes g3, take. What was that?
Queen is overworked. That's the point of the tactic.
It is. Look at Andrew's clock. 3 seconds now. They've equalized. Amazing stuff. Nihal. Oh, and the blunders the rook. Oh, and after an incredible, but still it was worse, of course. It was very tough to save that. And Andrew prevails again, Mike, 2.5 to a half.
Exactly.
What a finale.
In the live ratings, Andrew's even catching up a little bit. Not that that matters for the match. You just got to score one more point than your opponent.
Indeed. That is incredible. And so exciting are these finales. You think 5 minutes, that's so much time, but they're so close in strength that each game seems to come down to final seconds as they are off with a London system, a vintage weapon for Andrew, which he has played for years and years and years now.
And kind of frustrating for Neil on 2 accounts. Number one, he was not able to put away another game where that c6 pawn we both agreed was a useful pawn. And number two, he went from being up a minute to, what was it, about 20 seconds, to being down 15 seconds to 3 seconds. So far, we are seeing that this speed of Andrew, even if Nihal's pretty fast, somebody's got Tesla ludicrous mode, and that would be Andrew.
Indeed. And he is very comfortable in these structures. And what you said, it's interesting that you can be better, but sometimes the mantle of making a decision is always upon you. We saw Nihal there. He had to always, does he play e4 here? Does he break through there? That burns a lot of clock inevitably. So in those cases, sometimes actually being worse can be less of a burden than being better in name only, but having to decide, sort of when you break through.
I want to welcome the many thousands of viewers who have tuned in. This is the opening round of the 2020 Chess.com Junior Speed Chess Championship, sponsored by Chess Kid. Got to throw that in. You can see it in the background behind me. That's why you see it. And we've got the #1 seed Nihal Sarin playing the knockout qualifier Andrew Tang. Andrew had to win a bunch of matches this week just to get here. And so far, he's got a 2-game lead against the #1 seed.
He does. Now, I wouldn't say Nihal is terribly concerned. He's very measured. He's not very prone to tilt, as far as I know. And he's got a decent position here, not much to say. And he goes e5, so he's exploiting this undefended bishop on d3. If Andrew takes, Nihal will take back, and that d3 bishop will hang. So where does Andrew put the? He might have missed this move. Now he can play bishop g3. It's not a big problem, but Nihal tactically sharp here. I'm actually not sure what Nihal will do after bishop g3, because if he takes, then black is left with a slightly weak pawn on d6.
And
but he does it.
I just wanted to mention, irrespective of this game, Danya, if you have any kopecks or rubles in your pocket that you'd like to bet, the smart money is actually still on Nihal Sarin. According to the statistical odds makers, you can see right there, he's still got about a 60% chance of winning. Not quite as good as Joe Biden, but the smart money is still on Nihal Sarin at the moment. So we all know, though, that it's only as good as form. And so far, Andrew, even though he's not gotten some great positions, he's been able to convert a little bit better. So I don't know. Would you put money on a player who's down 2 games and has not been better in any game yet, or not?
I don't think so. In fact, just give me a second. I'm getting a phone. Hey, sports bettors, yeah, you're fired. All right, that was a terrible performance. All right, bye. I don't know, because again, I think in terms of rating, of course, Nihal is a better player, classical chess. Andrew is just so good at blitz. It's just unbelievable. The guy is, I think you cannot use his FIDE rating as any kind of measuring stick. Now, I do think this is going to be a close match. I still think this is going to come down to the bullet. As in, I don't think it's going to be lopsided, but I don't think Andrew is, or I don't think Nihal is the favorite.
Yeah, it's still pretty early to tell. And I don't have, I mean, I used to be the stat guy for Chess.com, but, you know, I've gotten a little bit busy with Chess Kid, and Matt Jensen has done a great job with the stats. But the biggest comeback ever, back when we just used to do death matches, I believe was 5 games. I think Yakov Norowitz came back, and Irina Krush was maybe down 5 games as well against one of the Kazintseva sisters. But when you get past 5, I doubt we've had any one-on-one match where somebody's come back, unless there's just a match I'm not remembering. We're a long way away from that, but you kind of want to put your stopgap there and say, let's not get past 4 or 5.
Yeah, and it appears that Nihal is better here. I think Andrew has let something slip. Look at his king side. All these weak squares on the king side. He's trying to sort of patch things together, but this bishop more like a band-aid than a permanent fix. Nihal can try to trade it off with bishop d6 and then later swing his knight to f4. There's also a potential exchange sacrifice. I'm not sure it's quite time for that yet, but there's stuff to consider here for sure. You know, again, these dark squares are so weak for white. So I think Andrew was lulled to sleep a little bit here by the symmetrical structure, but definitely a chance here for Nihal if he can play this accurately.
Yeah, I'm looking at the players' expressions, even though Nihal is, well, they both look pretty calm. When Andrew plays chess, what gets me is that he almost looks bored, even though he's playing so fast. Does that ever affect your, do you ever look at your player's camera in public one-on-one matches? Because you've played a lot of them this summer.
I do occasionally, just to sort of gauge, and I try not to fall in love with that because sometimes it's either underwhelming in terms of, you know, if I play Andrew and I'm okay, so tilted, I won this, I flagged him, and Andrew's just has the same expression as if he's up 10-0. But on the contrary, if your opponent is showing visible signs of frustration, that can give you that little push and that reinforcement you need. So I sometimes like to gauge my opponent's expression, but I wouldn't put too much stock in it. As you say, Andrew is, I mean, the guy is just unbelievably level-headed, and it's, you know, at this point, it's become legendary and for very good reason.
And perhaps I should not have dipped my toes in any political waters, but we have a good joke in the Twitch chat of somebody saying that the Tang gang is well represented. So not the Yang gang, but the Tang gang. So does that mean that every chess fan gets a monthly stipend from the government? That's what the Tang gang should be behind, right?
Well, with Andrew's speed, maybe he deserves. Nihal here, he might need some speed to convert this advantage because he's now taken over a minute. I still like the move bishop d6. Just trying to trade the bishops and get access to those dark squares. I know it looks a little bit plain vanilla, but this can unravel very quickly for white with queen j3 and knight f4.
Yeah, it's not often you see such a horrible bishop for black on b7, and yet black is probably the one dictating the action. So if black could just fix that one problem of his bishop on b7, then every advantage would be his, I think.
Indeed. And as Andrew ponders his move, we actually have some really cool calculations to share with you guys. We have the Smarter Chess match prediction, the statistical prediction. So as we can see, the prediction is for Nihal to win the 5-minute portion. I don't know how realistic that is. And he's listed as the favorite here statistically for all sections, including the bullet, with a 75% win probability, with a pretty lopsided prediction. Mike, hot take on that?
I think 75 might be about right. I mean, I did demur at the beginning of the broadcast when you asked for a legitimate prediction, but Smarter Chess, you know, that's like the 538 of the chess world. I believe these stats. However, again, I will go back to what I've said. Usually 1 versus 16 is, you know, as a chess fan, you're just basically watching Nakamura or Magnus just, you know, play cat and mouse with somebody. But this is a legitimate match, as we've seen in the opening 30 minutes, where the 16, I mean, 1 in 4 is a real chance. You would not, you bet your life on a 1 in 4 coin flip. And by the way, what coin are you using? But that's what makes me so intrigued by the Junior Speed Chess Championship.
Yeah, literally every match could go either way. That is just incredible. But this game seems to be spiraling somewhat out of control for Andrew. As we've discussed, these weak squares on the king side. And part of the problem could be that if he takes the bishop back, which he has to, queen c5 check follows, then this queen infiltrates to f2, followed by knight f4. This is nasty stuff for Andrew. That's why he's thinking maybe he's trying to find some sudden resource. He has to take the bishop. If he takes the rook, the same thing might follow. I'm not even sure black needs the rook to mount a decisive invasion on the king side. So he has taken with the rook. That seems to be the lesser evil. But again, we see he's sort of dragging his feet here. Queen c5 follows. I don't see a defense after queen f2, honestly.
Yeah, neither do I. I mean, the only advantage of trading rooks, if you play king f1, knight g3 is not mate. Now, that's not a ringing endorsement for playing king f1, but it was an extra possibility. But I think you're spot on. It's possible there's multiple ideas, but don't play queen e3.
I was about to say.
Don't play queen e3 thinking it's the same thing, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, one thing he might be concerned about, if queen f2, knight f1, knight f4, Andrew does have queen c2. He's sort of holding on. It's not mate. Even in this position, queen d4, it's obviously much, much better for black. Maybe Nihal is trying to find the most accurate way to put Andrew away. We have seen time and time again incredible resilience on display from Andrew, so you certainly don't want to be sloppy in the conversion stage. And he starts with knight f4, so he tries to keep things flexible. Bishop f1 is likely now. Maybe he's just going to go after this pawn on e5, playing something like queen d4, double attacking the knight of the pawn. But in that case, Andrew does have queen c3. So it's not completely over, and 27 seconds is a little bit concerning for Nihal. So he's going to have to be crisp here.
It should be noted that if you play, I don't know, something weird like king g3 to cover f2, then the simple queen d4 seems to pick off a piece because of the multiple pieces on the d file.
Great point, and they are both basically undefended. I'm not sure what's stopping Andrew from going bishop f1. Maybe there's some sort of resource that I'm missing. Maybe queen f2. I mean, it's a slightly different version, and he does it. Now, queen c3 or queen c2 seems forced to defend the knight. Then Nihal could involve that d-pawn, send it down the board, open up that bishop. So he goes g5. He basically accumulates the pressure. The problem for Andrew is his queen's tied to this knight. So it doesn't seem feasible for Andrew to generate counterplay against black's king, although that is something to think about. Eventually just dropping that knight on d2, going queen d6, and throwing your chips into the center of the table.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out a way for a repetition after queen d6.
I think you should do it.
Thinking about that also.
I think you should just do it. I mean, I think that's the last resort. And he's thinking, I think he's going to do it. He's going queen c3, so he's going for c7, similar idea. But I thought that was actually a chance. Okay, d4. Now queen c7 seems like a no-brainer to me. Okay, queen c1. So he's still holding back. Maybe he's hunting for the right opportunity, which is a bit of a gamble. But 3 seconds for Andrew, and 9, again, the time scramble. So he's going into passive defense mode. He is challenging Nihal to find a way forward. But now d3 and knight e2, I do not like that approach from Andrew. I think this gives black a much easier time of it. Bishop takes h3, and then knight e4. Okay, he's holding it together. Queen c2. You can't take the queen. Queen d2. Look at that move from Andrew. Amazing. And he's holding it together, but he's going to lose on time. Whoa.
Yeah,
wow.
And just like you said, Danya, passive defense, you have to keep solving problem after problem. If you just chuck your chips in, as you say, you know what you're trying to do. You're trying to just check or promote a pawn or something. It's much more clear what you're trying to do.
That final move, bishop f5 also, Mike, was actually incredibly strong from Nihal because he was threatening to capture the knight on e4 and the queen would lose its defender. So I actually think even objectively, it was very, very bad for Andrew, and he's definitely going to have to adjust that in these time scrambles. And Nihal, well, he's gaining a point back, and it's only a 1-point game. We have a somewhat unconventional ready here where Nihal has doubled back and decided to fianchetto his bishop. So not too theoretical, double fianchetto now on the board. Andrew putting out a Slav structure. It's a very solid position for black. Nihal not going for the opening advantage, Mike, but just a slow roll kind of game.
Yeah, really weird to play g3 and e3. That's one of those general rules you tell kids, you know. If you've already played g3, don't play e3 or vice versa, because your bishop can only pick one diagonal. So what do you make of this decision? If white had played d3, it would just be some sort of like, you know, reverse dragon setup. But why is white able to get away with this weird structure?
Well, the thing is, it's one of those things, classic modern chess, right? The concrete, I guess, specifics of the position supersede the general principle. Usually the reason you're told not to play this is because these squares that I'm highlighting are left very weak. But because of the way white set this up, his queen is guarding d3. He can take on e5. I would say I'm not a huge fan of this setup, but you know, you could try to kind of work around the edges here with knight a4, knight c5. So it has, I guess, its charm. And it could be one of those provocative openings where you frustrate your opponent, right? You think, man, I should get an advantage against this, and you fail to do so, and then equality can feel like a defeat.
Well, while we've
So-
got a little bit of a lull, and Daniel, I'll burn 20 seconds for you to do a little bit of extra analysis in your head. On my Chess Kid shows, I love to do a little bit of trivia. So I was trying to think of a trivia question that related to the first 45 minutes of chess that we've seen here. And I think I've come up with one, although the problem is it's a little bit subjective and not objective. But here we go. I'm going to try it anyway. We've been talking a lot this afternoon about pawn wedges. So my question to all of the fans is, which game, which was voted best game of the 90s by Informator, I believe it was best game, involved maybe one of the best pawn wedges of all time? Okay.
Wow.
So Donnie's going to think about it. Maybe our fans are going to think about it too. I don't actually know if it was voted best game or maybe it was like #2 game, but it clearly is the best pawn wedge game of the 90s. So maybe I'll restructure my question that way. What's the best pawn wedge game of the 90s? So I even got kudos from Smarter Chess on my question. So anyway, so we can be looking at our chessboard here while everybody in the chat tries to tell me what the answer is.
Well, thanks for distracting me for the rest of the commentary, Mike. Let me distract you and ask you a trivia question that is of much lower caliber, but Nihal Sarin was asked if he has a chess nickname. What does he look like to you, Mike? What would you give Nihal as a nickname based on how much of a beast he is on the board?
Well, I happen to know what his friends call him. So are you wanting me to reveal that information?
I do want you to reveal that first as we think about the pawn wedge game.
His friends call him the devil.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's pretty soft-spoken when I've interviewed him in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit surprised by that. We didn't get a chance to ask Andrew the same question because, well, he just qualified a couple of days ago, and I'm sure he was busy preparing for the match. So if anybody in the chat has a better name or a friend name for Nihal, a more professional nickname, he may be open to different nickname ideas if anybody's got it in the chat. I'm actually looking to see if anybody has the answer to my question. Some people are saying Kasparov Topalov. Now that was in the 90s. He snuck in there in 99, but I don't remember a pawn wedge.
So is it a single pawn that you're referring to, or like maybe a pawn chain?
It's absolutely a single pawn. And
single pawn, that's what I thought. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you and I know when we talk about pawn wedges, we're usually talking about a center pawn because that literally divides the board into two hemispheres. And this pawn did exactly that. I'm looking to see if anybody's got it. I don't think anybody has. I'm trying to check both chats.
I'm thinking too, but
You know the game. Oh, wait. Okay, well, one of our staff members, Smarter Chess, got it right. I don't know if he was the first one.
I actually don't know that game.
Yeah, Smarter Chess got it. Okay, so game. Smarter Chess, you win a premium subscription that you already get forever anyway. It's Ivanchuk Yusupov 91, where Yusupov gets the pawn on e3 and continually threatens mate on f2, like for the entire game, and sacrifices his entire queen side to force mate.
I'm going to have to look at that game.
Yeah, okay, I'll take over chat while you do a 30-second find on that game. Was it 91? No, it was in Brussels, 91. It was actually a rapid game, but Ivanchuk Yusupov, fantastic game. I'll try to take over the commentary while you Google that. Black is playing something in Chess Kid land that we call the corkscrew, because the bishop on g2 is the key to popping the white king. So when you trade bishops, it's like popping the corkscrew on a wine bottle. And the general rule is if somebody corkscrews you, don't take, because you're inviting the black queen into your territory. You want black to take you so that when your king takes back, you deprive the enemy queen access, in this case, to h3, and the other side would be h6. But white's got the weak pawns in this position, except for a7, which black seems to have just sacrificed. Let's see if we can figure out what is going to happen if the pawn on a7 gets captured. The idea is what?
Yeah. Oh, b5. Oh, what a man! It's almost as if he's known as the devil.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, what an idea! What a devilish idea!
I got tricked by it.
So e4 by. Oh no, that's Andrew. Andrew's springing the trap. But Nihal's the devil for not falling into it. So e4. He's basically trying to blunt the influence of the rooks. Can he take now though? Okay, but then we take and go like 95 maybe. This looks
Yeah,
pretty
somehow
scary.
your knight clears off the 7th rank with tempo, as you've shown, and then b5 resumes its ugly head.
Mike, I'm so sorry to rejoin the commentary. I know you had a great time without me. My apologies.
I actually needed you to see that game because that's one of those things that's going to eat at you for the rest of the broadcast. You must have seen that game now that you looked at it.
I think it rings a bell, a distant bell. I think probably my coach showed it to me years ago. But I will say, and I will confess, full disclosure, I'm not as well versed in some of sort of the classics as some of my fellow GMs. I think I know a fair amount, but there's a lot of games that I just haven't seen.
And
so
yeah, you've got 350 rating points on me, but I've got a decade or more of just browsing chess books. So,
and you've got a lot of trivia under your belt as well. Just going to brag on your behalf.
Also, Danya, I was alive when Informator was a real thing.
I mean, I actually have some Informator, and I actually have this affinity for old school stuff like that. So I like flip phones and old books and Informator. So I do have that side of me, which respects that kind of stuff a lot. I guess a nostalgia for it. So
yeah,
in any case,
I think they might still be making them. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think maybe they're digitized. So check out Informator if you have that particular passion. And Andrew's checking out that D3 pawn. So has this opening strategy backfired for Nihal? His position is solid. I don't see a way directly to break through for Andrew. Maybe activate this rook via E6, but you also have to be careful. Maybe just create some luft on the back rank with H6, because that could also come back to impact black. Okay, DE by Andrews. He's opening up the file. I would say DE should be the proper recapture for Nihal. I mean, FE allows knight G4. That seems pretty unthinkable. Is something bothering him, though?
Yeah, I mean, you want to activate your rook. You want fewer pawn islands. But the number one reason is just like you said, the G4 square is a little bit too weak to allow knight to G4.
That's right. And there is an interesting tactic where B5, knight C5, then you take on G2, and by knight takes F3, swinging that queen over to... Okay, so he has taken, but now he has activated the rook via E6. Of course, A7 still untouchable. White's queen is tied down to this F3 pawn, and Andrew swinging his rook around probably to H6, but maybe also to F6.
Yeah, I think it's a position where he's going to keep toggling his rook to force White's pawns to advance, and then eventually the pawns are going to be vulnerable. So like rook H6, H4, rook G6, and then it's getting kind of hard to push pawns because if you play G4, knight takes G4, almost certainly looks winning, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just showing it on the board. White's whole position collapses. Black has more than enough attackers. And again, we see 30 seconds to 43 seconds. It is going to be another scramble. And this is one of the worst kinds of positions to play when you don't have much time remaining on your clock. I don't see off the top of my head, Mike, a way to protect everything. Now, knight takes F3 here is actually possible, and queen takes C5. That would be, okay, he goes rook F6, and knight D7, trying to root that knight out. So what if rook takes F3, though? What if rook takes F3? I guess he wants queen E2. And now the rook is kind of stranded. I don't really believe in that. But will Andrew find a refutation in time? Maybe rook takes F3, knight G4, something crazy. Ooh. This is a very interesting idea by Nihal. Andrew could also go rook H6 here, just kind of taking a step back. He's definitely trying to calculate rook takes F3, but he's down to 10 seconds. Yeah, this is going to be another time scramble.
Squandering the time advantage to try to find the knockout blow, but if you don't find it, you've just burned up 80% of your time on this one.
And he's got 2 seconds. He's got to make a move. Rook H6. So he bails out. Nihal probably breathing a sigh of relief now. Ooh. And okay, you could not have taken on H2 there. The king was escaping. Now it fizzles out a little bit. Queen takes A7 is now possible. And the tables have turned, Andrew. We're into a little bit too much clock, Mike.
If you trade queens too, the white rooks make a lot more sense than the black rooks because the attack just fizzles to nothing.
Exactly. And now one pawn to the good and 1 second for Andrew. He is trying
queen
to
D2
counterplay.
forces a trade of queens.
That's a great move. That would have been a great move, but he goes after the pawns. Andrew trying to rip open the king position. 5 seconds for Nihal. He is definitely not out of the woods. Trying to trade queens. Andrew refusing. Of course, A4. Maybe just start pushing the pawn. Rook H1, stopping H4. All right, what's going on here? Queen E5. Andrew trying this way and that way to get to White's position. Another time scramble. Nihal activating his rook via C5. What a maneuver. Oh, and he blunders his queen. Oh,
that well.
Oh, but okay, it was already lost.
I was going to suggest queen D4 to trade queens, but if you know your opponent's going to blunder the queen, then clearly he knows more than I do.
No, that would have been a great move, and a bit of a heartbreaker there, Mike, for Andrew, who seem to have that incredibly strong attack going and just not quite enough time to calculate the ramifications of rook takes f3. So very savvy choice by Nihal to go knight d7. That was the turning point. And the score, ladies and gentlemen, is tied.
Second win in a row for Nihal. And what we've seen so far is having the better position has not always worked out to victories. These couple positions were white, where Nihal's got the strong wedge pawn. Neither one has led to victory. Andrew was better most of that game. This reminds me of a very frustrating experience when I was a kid playing Mario Kart, where the number 2 player always got the better weapons and overtook the number 1 player on the final lap. So anyway, Smarter Chess, I'm not sure what the predictions were for a Mario Kart reference in the first hour. Oh, but it's 101 where I'm sitting. So I did not get the Mario Kart reference in the first hour.
I can't help you with that because I've never played Mario Kart. My go-to game was Age of Empires. That is basically the only game I played, and Super Smash Brothers on an old Nintendo 98 with my brother. Those were the only 2 games I played as a kid.
Well, we're actually borrowing from video games. On my last Chess Kid show with National Master Alice Lee, we did a speed run, just like they try to do on video games, where you try to beat the video game as quickly as possible. Alice and I did a speed run to see who could beat all the bots the fastest. But actually, our speed run was mostly who could beat the most bots in 10 minutes. There's a problem with a speed run on the Chess Kid bots. You want to hear what the problem is?
I do.
Well, during quarantine, as you probably know, Vishy Anand was stuck in Germany because of the flight situation, and was trying to play his son on Chess Kid, whose son was still in India. And Vishy talks to me on WhatsApp, and he's like, Mike, I've got this question. How strong is bot level 10 on Chess Kid? And I said, well, Vishy, I can't beat level 10. I assume it's an IM or GM string. And Vishy says to me, Mike, I can't beat level 10. I said, okay, maybe we made that bot too hard. Now, in fairness to Vishy, I don't think he was taking it that seriously. He did say if he focused really hard, he thinks he would have a good chance. But there you go, bot level 10. I think it's called megahertz. I have to remember what our bots are called.
Wow, interesting. Well, if Vishy can't beat it, then that's a pretty good indicator. Even Vishy not taking something seriously is still Vishy. And what have I done admitting that I never played Mario Kart? I normally like Daniel's commentary, but this is unbearable. Oh, man. I have reached a point of no return, Mike. I should have never said that.
I can hang my queen on analysis and they'll laugh and call it the Botez Gambit. We'll all have a good time. But you'll never be forgiven if there's a piece of culture that they've experienced that you haven't. So,
well, I was too busy playing a board game. My apologies.
Yeah, like, don't tell anybody, but I've never seen Lord of the Rings. And if people find out about that, then I'll never hear it. We won't even be able to go back to chess for the next 3 hours.
Wait, are we still on air? Oh my goodness,
boy.
I think we might still be on air, Mike.
Yes, as Ben.
We are both going to be fired after this broadcast.
Is there a level of this microphone lower than mute? That's a Ben Feingold joke.
That's funny. Yeah, I think that also I had that element of Russian upbringing, so some of the sort of stuff I did was somewhat unconventional. And some of the stuff I watched as a kid. I did love Scooby-Doo, though. That was my school ended at 3, and I remember just running home and watching the reveal of the monster in Scooby-Doo. That was my moment of my day.
I can't add anything to that conversation except that you'll always be an 8-year-old boy to me, Donya.
Oh, well, that's very sweet. I don't think I can continue this broadcast. I'm getting emotional. All right, so knight b6 now. Let's take a look at the game. We have a middle game on the board, another London, where Andrew has, well, a knight on b6, right in the sort of midst in the heartland of Black's position. This knight on g5, though, it's in a little bit of trouble, although I guess it has the e4 square in case of h6. Now, notice if Black goes h6, he can take on e6, and this knight on g6 is going to be undefended. So it's actually kind of annoying. Andrew preparing to expand on the queen side. He is definitely better here. I think he has gotten sort of his type of position. What Nihal could consider is something like e5. At the right moment, maybe you break through in the center, you try to mix things up, because again, Black is very, very cramped. But Mike, we've seen Nihal very, very sort of measured and good in these positions, even when it seems like his position is pretty cramped.
Yeah, I mean, but the goal, remember, Donya, is to get the slightly worse position. I'm not sure that Nihal's got the memo on that.
Yeah, exactly.
The knight on b6 is one of those funny pieces that's controlling a lot of squares and is being an octopus, but might never get out.
Right, exactly. So you might as well try to support it there. Now, maybe one way that Andrew's trying to hedge his bets. When he does play c4, if Nihal takes, the knight does have this potential evacuation route through a4, which I agree is not ideal. But as they say in Russian, this knight is an eternal knight, which kind of goes into what you're saying, Mike. It can't be chased. It can't be won by a pawn, but it's kind of pretty much there forever. So Nihal taking his time here. This is an important moment. He could try to play knight d5 and trade off the knights. That's one option. But Andrew could follow up with c4, and that knight could be replaced by a pawn wedge. Wait, is this would be known as a pawn wedge, right? Or no?
Well, no, because it's behind the black pawn, so it's a little bit obscure, you know.
So it's behind the pawn on b5. Interesting.
I think it doesn't count as a wedge because it's not blocking a black pawn, which would really inhibit the space. It's on the other side, so it's strange, you know, that it's like casting Owen Wilson in the movie Behind Enemy Lines. It's just a strange choice.
Very totally. Yes, I've seen that movie many times. My favorite, Owen Wilson. See, when you say Wilson, the only association I make is Wilson in Castaway. That might have been the few movies to make me cry. I'm not usually a kind of get emotional while watching a movie type kind of guy, but that got to me for sure.
Well, what about isolation? When you play these online matches, do you like to be in a house with nobody else so there's no chance of, like, I'll be honest with you, when I do broadcast, I don't even want anybody around me because just I want this feeling of like, you know, like this being my inner quiet place. So
I agree completely. And it's the case for me when I do broadcasts or when I play tournaments. Sort of I like to be fully engaged. But the first few times I played Magnus in these long matches, I was in my dorm room's computer cluster with sort of my friends just talking. And that can actually add an element of sort of, it can lighten the feeling of playing a high stakes or high stress match. But I agree, like when you're broadcasting, you just need to be fully engaged.
Let me ask you, when you're in your dorm room and you're playing the best player in the world, do your friends have any idea what's going on? Like, so how do you describe that to them? So
the first time I got paired with Magnus in one of the titled arenas, I was just sort of playing casually, and I was paired with Magnus. And so I tell my friends, okay, guys, you need to kind of quiet down here. I'm playing Magnus. And of course, they knew who Magnus is. I mean, they heard of Magnus. They're not chess players. But they don't fully understand the magnitude, get it, magnitude of playing Magnus. So I was trying to kind of not be obnoxious, but I think it was very clear to them that I had suddenly become 100 times more intense. And eventually they kind of understood. But yeah, it was interesting.
The knight on b6 does have a route back to the game, but now black is faced with the question of whether or not to take. And the classic question of the day, is it a strong pawn or is it a weak pawn? My first inclination is that it's quite weak.
Right, but it could be used as a decoy, and white could break through in the center with something like d5. And if this happens, well, that f7 pawn is going to be, things can collapse here for black. So the problem might be not so much the pawn as the pawn uses it. So you could maybe take and go rook e7, lending more support to this e6 pawn. But obviously now this pawn could become a strength, and the queen could swing around to a5, and a6 is suddenly very weak as well. So this is a definite pickle for black. If Nihal does nothing, then white could take on t5 and ruin black's pawn structure. h6 might be considered here by Nihal, but again, white could take on d5, simply drop his knight back, and guess what? He's got a big positional advantage here with this terrible bishop facing this pawn, double pawns in the center. So big time decision by Nihal. I think Andrew is so far playing an excellent positional game.
Yeah, and Andrew has burned a lot of time as well. Despite the fact that we generally regard him as being a little bit of a faster player, that lack of time really cost him in the previous game, and it's the reason that this match is tied. He might have been able to hold that position were it not for him being down 10 seconds in game number 5.
That's exactly right, and dipping below 30 seconds now is Nihal. So okay, so h6. So he's decided on this move, chasing the knight away. Now, again, a decision for Andrew. Does he, in fact, take on d5? And as you said, Mike, I think he needs to make these decisions a little bit faster, go with his gut. His intuition is incredible, and I can just attest to that firsthand. But we see him burning through his time advantage here. So he's trying to decide, do I take this knight? Maybe if bishop d5, Nihal could actually take the knight in order to preserve the integrity of his pawn structure more or less in the center. But again, Andrew could go after that pawn on a6. Let's see what decision he makes. He does go for bishop takes d5, and Nihal actually takes back with his bishop. So Andrew could take, and he has a stable advantage here, the pawn majority on the queen side, but both below 30 seconds. This is going to be yet another time scramble. Every single game, Mike, has come down to basically a time scramble. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and the double pawns, while they may look like a weakness, they actually deprive White's pieces of a lot of entry squares. So they're not fun to look at, but they do a great job of guarding a bunch of squares in the e-file that White's pieces would like to use.
Great point, and it could also be an anchor point for Black's rook to reach e4. Okay, so Andrew has pushed his pawn to b4, where it is now pressured by the rook. Nihal could bring his queen to b8. He decides to bring his knight over to c6. As you say, these double pawns, they're restricting White somewhat. And again, is this a strength or is it a weakness? That pawn on b4, now the subject of discussion, queen to d7. It seems like Black is very solid here. It's not going to be easy to break through. Andrew definitely still with the advantage going after this pawn. Rook b5 looks good for Black here. He's got to make a move. Here we go,
Yeah,
5 seconds.
Queen f5, knight e3 would be a problem, so he chooses e6 instead. But that allows rook e1 with tempo. Interesting decision.
And he does it. He had knight takes c4 there, actually, which would have been an interesting tactic. Aha, so queen pressuring the knight on c2. Now knight takes a5, queen d5. He's got to make a move. 2 seconds for Nihal. Here we go. Attacking the knight. He's moving it around to b5.
All right, it's reflex as a clock. Let's see if Andrew's older mouse can still get the job done.
I think it has on so many occasions. He's definitely still better pushing in the endgame. Bishop on f8, so passive. That pawn on a6 now very weak. This is going to be so hard to defend. He's picking off the pawn on e4, dropping the rook back to c4, and slow rolling it now is Andrew. He does not have to rush. Rook c6, a huge threat. Nihal going after the pawn. The only thing he can do, generating some counterplay. But will it be enough? I don't think so. Look at those passers. Look at those snappers. A6.
Yeah, look how the knight guards all the squares on the a5.
Amazing.
Needs.
And now it gives itself away for the greater good. This is going to be unstoppable pawns for Andrew, and Nihal accepting the inevitable, resigning. Amazing performance there by Andrew, keeping the pressure, his foot on the gas pedal all the way, basically from start to finish. Wire-to-wire victory as he jumps up on top by 1 point, Mike.
He managed the endgame well. He puts to bed that 2-game mini winning streak from Nihal. Once again, takes the lead. And just want to check the match clock here. How much time is left in the 5-minute section?
A little bit less than 20 minutes.
Yeah, it looks like it. So this will not be the final game. We'll have at least 2 more games in this section. And, you know, we sometimes play the hypothetical game in these matches. Hypothetically, would Andrew like to be tied, at least tied after the 5-minute segment? I have to think yes. I think that Andrew is putting a little bit more of his hopes and his stakes on the faster time. Right. But he's playing just fine in the 5-minute.
And despite the increment, he wants, you know, he's looking for the bullet section. The increment does not fully, as we have seen, counteract the effect of less time. And I think he might have that marginal edge in time scrambles, as we see Nihal taking his time on move 5. So yeah, we see Nihal taking his time here with a kind of a line that has become fashionable recently, Mike.
It's almost like a Queen's Indian defense in reverse or something.
Yeah, and I've seen this. Hikaru is a big fan of this system with White. It can actually contain some venom if Black does not handle the central tension properly. That extra tempo, as you say, could come in very handy. I think Andrew is doing a good job of this. Now, one example of this would be if you just kind of take everything and then castle and you're very casual. Well, guess what? White can take on c6, take on g7, and then fork the king and the pawn. So this transformation could actually be a little bit negative for Black. So Andrew with some important decisions here in the early going.
I got to ask, you saw that so quickly. Is that a canned trap that you'd seen before, or did you just figure that out so quickly? I'm just
Mike, I'm not big on canned traps. Okay.
Okay.
I hate canned traps as much as I hate canned tuna. Okay. I don't like tuna, so I don't like traps. But no, I've seen ideas like this before, and usually a lot of people wonder about this. You know, how do I see stuff quickly? A lot of it is pattern recognition. I've seen something similar, right? A similar fork, even though it's been wearing different clothes. So,
well, let me ask another question in the early moments of the game as we try to figure out where the players are going to sort out their pieces. I think the first trivia question went well, so let's try another one. Of the 16 players in the Chess.com Junior Speed Chess Championship, which one has played in an official event on ChessKid? We used to have a ChessKid National Championship. It was called the ChessKid Online National Invitational Championship. That's a mess, so we called it Conic. But anyway, which of the 16 players has played in an official event. It was in the very fledgling days of Chess Kid. There you see all the players on the screen. So you've got to pick one of them. And I believe this was back in 2013. So I'm going to follow, see who gets it right. You'll get your name announced on the air. I don't know if I have license to give away premium memberships, but I'll at least announce your name on the air. And I'm looking at the Chess.com TV chat.
I have a guess, but I won't say it until later.
Yeah, this one you can use your powers of deduction, have a pretty good idea.
I actually don't know. I mean, it's just basically a wild guess, but that's really interesting. And it's only been one. Huh.
I think only one. And we have a correct answer from, actually, this is a person who often comes to my Chess Kid live streams. It's Chitta Yang Tiringari. Sorry.
Of course.
You already have a premium membership, so I apologize I botched your name. It's Jeffrey Xiong, played back in 2013. Seems like just a moment ago, but he was a kid. He's still a kid. Well, you're still a kid if you're talking to, if your mom or something, but Jeffrey was literally a kid back then.
That is true. Wow. How time flies, Mike. I remember Jeffrey as a FIDE master, then an IM. Guess what? He's over 2,700 now, all grown up. Well, to me. I guess it all depends on your perspective. Yeah, I love those trivia questions. That's really interesting. It's just so cool to watch the progression of these young players, as they start out and then they become stronger and stronger.
Now, you're just a touch older than these players, not too much, but would you say that the players we're watching now are the first generation where internet chess was practically required to get better? I don't know if I'm phrasing this question the way I want to. I mean, I know you must have played a ton of internet chess, but in the last 5 to 8 years, internet chess has gotten so much bigger, and you were already a GM 5 years ago.
Yeah, I would say that I think I see what you're saying. And I would say the answer is yes. Now, in my generation, it was sort of split 50-50 between people who were big on online chess when they were little growing up. I was one of those people. I played, tons and tons, basically since the time I was 7. But I know quite a few grandmasters right around my age who were just not that big on online chess as well. And the generation coming after, which is who we're watching now, virtually all of them have a very, very deep footprint of online chess.
Yeah, I asked all the players a couple of pre-event questions, and I did not ask the question, what was the most formative chess book you read growing up? Because I think I might have gotten a lot of kids to say they never really read a chess book.
Right. That's very true. And sometimes I actually find it very hard to answer those questions when I'm put on the spot. And it's like, what's your favorite movie? And then you forget every single movie you've ever watched. You know what I'm saying? But you're right. I mean, it's not that kids don't read chess books, but there's just so many resources now that there's various paths to take for improvement. And it'll definitely be interesting to explore their training routines and how they've reached the top. But just taking a look at the game, we see Andrew's clock very, very concerning. 50 seconds after 14 moves. I mean, this is a massively lopsided time situation. Now, I don't think black is worse here. Andrew trying to put pressure on that pawn on d4. The only issue is that bishop on e4 really has no way back, right? Nihal could even consider something like knight h2, and he will be threatening to trap the bishop.
And so does black need to play g6 in an emergency, g5, sorry, to get the bishop?
I think he might, but that creates its own weaknesses on the king side, but I think that's inevitable. The knight can then swing around to g. I would quite like this move. I said it more as an illustrative kind of move, but actually, the more I think about it, knight h2 makes some sense. So we'll see what he does. He has time to burn. He has 2 minutes still extra. He can also, and he does it. Okay, I like it. So does Andrew now have to play g5, or does he have, what he can do also is to take and something like knight e7 and get the bishop to c6, but that involves ceding the center. He does go g5 and knight f1. So Nihal, look where he's heading. He's heading right for that h5 score. Juicy outpost there. Definite advantage here.
Really nice idea how the knight backs up to induce g5 and then backs up again to head for h5. You don't see that kind of idea very often.
Indeed, and the knight moves backwards always produce that positive aesthetic effect. Now Nihal is spoiled for choice. He could take on d5, go bishop f3, and open up some pressure on this pawn. Every move would involve definitely knight h5. Man, I cannot draw arrows today. It's actually one of my weaknesses. I'm so sloppy at drawing arrows. But he could also go c5, locking up the center, and also going knight h5. So again, it's one of those things where he's got to make a decision relatively quickly to preserve, I would say, a decently sized time advantage. Now, very quickly, before we resume our discussion, we want to remind everyone that the counter refers only to the 5+1 segment, not to the whole match. So after the 10 remaining minutes of the 5-minute portion, the counter will reset and there will be 60 minutes of 3+1, followed by 30 minutes of bullet.
And Danya, we're showing this intricate positional idea. You failed to plug your book. I know you wrote it a long time ago, but we were just talking about books, and you didn't even remind people that you wrote a chess book about positional chess when you were 14 years old, right?
I did, and well, it was a great experience. It's not one of those things I don't recommend it to my students, even when I think they should work on their positional chess. I think there have been a lot of better books written on positional chess, and I truly believe that. But the book really was a formative moment in my chess development because I personally learn really well when I write stuff down. I think everybody has their way of learning, and so the book started out as a way for myself to improve my positional understanding, and it eventually blossomed. And Nihal, well, he is showing some incredible positional understanding here. Look at this. I mean, this black's position is collapsing here. F6, rook e6. But is that sufficient, Mike? Is that called plugging my book?
Well, I don't know if it's still in print. If it's not still in print, maybe you shouldn't be plugging it, but I would be plugging it.
It is.
And it's so awesome to me that this entire attack was born out of a retreat move, knight h2.
Exactly. And look at where it is now. I mean, Black's king is going to be out of print. So now a pawn to the good for Nihal. He can just take another one. I completely agree with you, Mike. Everything started with that knight to h5. And now look what it is now. 2 pawns extra and attacking. Nihal should take this home. Queen f4 to be considered now. Yep.
The saving grace for Tang is that he might run out of time before he has to keep defending this position. That might put him out of his misery. And if Sarin wins, Nihal wins, we'll be back to 3.5 wins apiece with 1 game to go. Probably 1 game. Could be 2, but probably just 1.
The way the games have gone, probably 1. I wouldn't bury Andrew quite yet. Now, one thing to consider, bishop b2 maybe, and rerouting the bishop in the spirit of what Nihal has. And he just decides to drop his knight back and retool his pieces. He's 2 pawns extra, so it's not like he needs to deliver checkmate. He's sort of casually improving his position. Now, Andrew going for g5, so he is not going to go down without a fight here.
Yeah, I sometimes don't try to win these positions too quickly online because you want to give yourself 2 ways to win, 1 on the clock and 1 on the board. You don't want to go for the gusto if you're risking anything.
And whoa, you've got to be careful now because queen f3, there's rook f6 that almost traps the queen. But knight f5, I guess, I'm pretty sure he missed that, but fortunately his bishop f5. And again, that knight, the hero of the position, Andrew trying to find chances here. Bishop h4, he's putting pressure on that. This is a little bit concerning for Nihal, but he can just take the bishop on g6 and swing the queen to d3. So I think he's fine, but now 12 seconds. He has got to be careful in his own right. This would be a heartbreaker if he lets it slip. Andrew won one of the pawns back. Okay, definitely lost some of the advantage, but now the bishop coming to f4.
Yeah, bishop definitely wants to be on e5. Might go there right now. We'll see.
But rook f1, he's keeping 1 pair of rooks to preserve the attack. Andrew has done a tremendous job here generating defensive chances. Nihal still better, but solid position, and he's trading. Now he can take on g3. I think that much of the advantage has evaporated. Nihal still off a pawn if he takes on d5, though. Wow. Okay, now chances for Andrew, queen b1. Possible. Nihal trying to push his pawn, dropping his rook back for the defense. 4 seconds now. Another time scramble. And he can force a draw.
Play rook g6, rook h6.
He might. I think that's what he's going for. But Nihal counterattacking the pawn. There's no defense. Aha, f6. Now if you take queen h7, he's got to make a move. 1 second.
Did he get it?
Will it be made? He did. Queen f5. They're both attacking. Is it made? Who's mating who?
All 3 results possible.
And Andrew loses that time. That is lost. He cannot move his queen without giving up the rook. Wow. But so close game, Andrew, but did not quite manage. And kudos to Nihal there. Incredible.
Yeah, I think if we had our eval bar working, then we would have broken it during that final time scramble because it probably was bouncing up and down faster than the stock market the last couple of days. So
exactly. Wow. And amazing job by Andrew there generating chances. But Nihal, even in time pressure, kept that foot on the gas pedal, kept generating chances. And what a win. And our match is tied. This is almost definitely going to be the last game of the 5-minute portion. Score is 3.5. Incredible.
Welcome to the 6,400 viewers or so. This is the opening round of the 2020 Junior Speed Chess Championship sponsored by Chess.com. You could call these kids chess kids, although they can all, hang with the world's elite at this point. They're all unbelievably awesome grandmasters. And we're watching the number 1 seed, Nihal Sarin, who's got his hands full against the number 16 seed, Andrew Tang of Minnesota. The qualifier, however, he's fully worthy of being in this event.
Absolutely. 16 seed in name only, and a player whose reputation precedes him as both a very strong grandmaster and a legend of blitz and bullet. So indeed, Nihal does have his hands full. We see here a London defense where Andrew has snagged a pawn. I'm pretty sure this is some sort of theoretical line. It doesn't seem to inspire confidence. Now, what Nihal could be going for is some sort of lead in development. And maybe he will target this b pawn. Now, Andrew could just drop his queen back to a4. I feel like this isn't great for black. Maybe I'm missing. I mean, nowadays, Mike, some of these lines to a human eye, they might seem, like winning, but there's subtleties in the position that give full-fledged counterplay to the opposition.
Yeah, in the last game, the black bishops were always side by side. Now they're side by side again. In fact, Danya, you might remember in the last game, the black bishops were on h7 and h8. And then they magically got to g5 and g6. It's like they both moved like knights.
Indeed.
When I wasn't watching, they both made the L shape. But yeah, the compensation here for the pawn looks, I don't know if it's enough, but I'm sure that Nihal must have had this on his computer and the computer said it was okay to play.
Right, but that could also be risky. And I've definitely had experiences with that where you check the evaluation, it says equal, then you look at the position, why is it equal again? And it can be very hard to just demonstrate. But queen b8 by Nihal, incredibly strong move. This is a fork and a very deadly one. If you defend the e5 pawn, not only does black win b2, but the rook is trapped. So Andrew might have to give up the e5 pawn, but that is a heck of an important pawn. Not only does he give up the pawn, he might have to move his own king out, and his king will be quite a bit more unsafe than black's. Nihal could follow it up with rook b8. So has Andrew blundered with queen c5 is the question. I think he has.
Yeah, usually try to figure out which pawn to give back and still get a playable position. But as you've just pointed out, it could be that neither one gives you a playable position. And there's no counterattack on the black king because famously knights guard kings from queens quite well. We've seen it a million times. And there's no way that white can generate anything against the black king, even though the black king can't castle.
That's right. And queen b4, the more I look at this, might be the lesser evil. And then going for this position. Now the bishop will be hanging in that case, which I missed initially. Now he goes knight d. Whoa. Okay, so queen takes e5 is not made. He has queen e3, fortunately. So knight d2 I actually really like. In the event of queen takes b2, you're going to have rook b1. And then black has got to be careful because rook b7 even immediately becomes a very real possibility. Then queen a1 check could be met with knight b1. And really, it's anyone's game. This could get very, very tactical. So queen takes e5, definitely the safer option. Queen takes b2 seems a little bit too speculative for me.
I got to be honest with you. Second straight time we've had a London. Well, actually, third straight time we've had a London, but they've all been exciting Londons. So
indeed,
don't believe the rap on the London system. Now, if we see a Berlin, I'm going to cry foul. I'm going to say
I'm leaving the commentary if we see it, but I don't think either of these players. I mean, Andrew is not a. You can count on one hand the amount of times Andrew has gone e1, e4, although he's been doing it more recently in bullet. So we'll see.
Wait, if you're saying it's in your contract, you can leave the commentary when there's a Berlin. I thought it was in my contract.
No, it's in my. I specifically bargained for that clause.
Okay, good to know.
Mr. Producer, yeah, no, I bargained for it, and they wouldn't budge. But then I called up some people. I was like, I cannot look at the Berlin anymore, and you're doing this, so I'm not going to be a commentator. But here we have not a Berlin endgame, but an endgame and an unbalanced one, as you said, Mike. I actually don't know if it looks good for black, right? Because of the visual deficiency in white's pawn structure. I do think white's position is still solid. This knight on b3 does have a stronghold on c5. One idea for black, though, is to go rook ca and the knight e5 and mount pressure on this backward c3 pawn. And he does go knight e5 first. If the bishops are traded, I'll also point out the knight is an outpost on c4. So problems to solve here for sure for Andrew.
Yeah, I was thinking about this exchange, though. You get the c4 square for your knight, but the white knight gets to c5. Somehow it feels to me that that's a net win for white, because then the c3 pawn, although it's backward, will never be attacked because there's too many knights clogging up the c file. So I was wondering if you got white to play knight c5, if you induced it somehow, if you would just put a rook on the c file and play knight d7 or something and play without the knights.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. And I've seen a lot of model games where that happens. You know, they say rook end games are drawn, but when you have a weakness like that, it can be hard to defend in the long term. So we do, and Andrew's got to decide, yeah, basically where he puts his knight. He could also put it on d4. There we go. A solid square, but one where it could potentially be chased away by e5.
And don't forget, after the 5-minute ends, this should be the final 5-minute game. We have 60 minutes of 3-minute action and then 30 minutes of bullet action, all with a 1-second increment. And this is the final 90-minute game. So if anybody wins this one, they will take a small lead into the break.
Now, do you put a lot of stock into that final game of each segment? Do you think that creates a psychological effect that spills over into the next segment?
I think kind of when it's back and forth, yeah, because your only chance to sort of sit and dwell and really take stock of what's happened is these two pretty short breaks that we've got. So otherwise, you don't have time to dwell on wins and losses. I mean, you know better. You've played, what, a dozen of these matches this summer. But I do take stock in it, actually. I personally, it would affect me, is all I can say. I don't know the inside workings of these players' brains, and I'm not a sports psychologist, but how about you? I mean, you had a similar match structure in your...
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is, you know, that break, it could definitely do you good or it could do you harm. And when you lose, you dwell on that last game, you dwell on the fact that you had a lead if you did. So I also think it's very psychologically important. Now, both of these players we know are virtually unshakable. So in this particular match, I think it's largely minimized. But still, one cannot deny that this is an important game, and it is officially the last game of the segment. As Andrew, now, is it a problem with my connect? Okay, it seems that he has disconnected. Or is this on my end? I'm afraid I see a red bar here.
A4 was played rook AC8, and then I don't see rook BC8, and then I don't see anything happening.
Rook A3, definitely the move, but I'm a little bit concerned about Andrew's internet here, as on my end it shows a red bar.
My end too, and while Andrew is sorting this out, we can take a look at how the live odds have changed. Let's go ahead and pick up our stock market tracker. There we see the NASDAQ outpacing this. No, just kidding. It looks like the bobblehead of Nihal has inched back up, suggesting that that it's just fine for him to go into the 3-minute segment with around an even score. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, I think neither player is particularly against that. You know, Andrew says, I'm going to keep it close until the bullet. Nihal says, okay, you know, I stabilize things. I play decently. I'm also very fast. So both players are satisfied. Okay, it seems that the situation has been fixed, and Andrew indeed goes rook A3. So Nihal really laying it on here. The pressure is quite severe, but you know, the principle of two weaknesses might come into play, which basically says in order to win one of these endgames, one weakness is not enough because the opponent can direct all of his defensive power to defending that weakness, as we see here. This pawn on c3 for the moment safely defended. Andrew getting his bishop out and chasing the rook away. This could turn if Nihal is not careful. Andrew does have some potential with his pieces. Knight could come to b5, although not immediately. And he does have a pawn majority, which he could start pushing. Again, you've got to be careful because b5 runs into a fork. So you have to do it in a very measured fashion. Let's see how Andrew plays this.
The fascinating thing I find about these endgames is you're always trying to figure out who benefits from a knight exchange, who benefits from a bishop exchange, who benefits from a knight versus bishop exchange, because those seem to be a lot of the key questions here. The 4 different kinds of endgames you could have if you reduce down to one minor piece for each side.
Right, and I think it's actually very unclear if you go knight c4 check, who benefits from this, because black does develop the potential of going e5 and chasing the knight away, but in closed positions like these, we know how scary knights can be. The knight could potentially, and he does go knight c4. He takes it with a pawn, so he's preparing for e5, in which case the d file is going to be open. Notice that if Andrew goes b5 and knight c6 check, that rook on b2 is hanging, so that doesn't work. The knight just doesn't quite have time, but he could go b5 and b6. That does look very speculative, though. He drops his king back to e1, bracing for impact here so that a rook move to the d file is not checked. I think a great decision by Nihal here. The opening of the d file benefits him. The bishop has an outpost on d3, but again, will it be enough? Will he actually be able to break through? Because for the time being, he also has to keep an eye on the possibility of going b5 and b6. He cannot get too crazy and divert all of his resources toward pressuring white on the d file.
Well, should Nihal play a6 here? Because if you stop the a and the b pawns from moving, then the white rooks don't look too useful on the a and the b files.
I think he did something similar by going bishop e8. Now the bishop is supervising that diagonal. Rook d3 is to be considered here. Sort of a very typical move. And he takes on d2, so he trades one pair of rooks. But I'm not sure that that is really the path to gaining a significant advantage. I think Andrew is breathing a sigh of relief here. Again, that knight move backwards, the knight heading for g3 potentially. I don't think Nihal is worse, but I don't see a clear way for him to break through. He's maybe trying to do something with f5 and g5. I don't know how scary that is. Andrew, look at his knight hither and thither to f3 it goes. Nihal stopping it from coming to g5. And now biding his time is Andrew. No, definitely Nihal still pressuring. He's trying to make something happen, pushing his pawns now. Knight e2 attacking the pawn, defending it. King e2, Andrew shifting his king. Rook to d8. Now the rook could head to d3.
Yep, it's going.
Brilliant play here by Nihal. Look at him on all sides of the board. He is pushing it in. And he can't take on c4 because of bishop e5. What a trap. Andrew repairing it, repeating the position. Again, a time scramble.
Yeah, I think Black's going to be able to move his king to d5 and then maybe play pawn f4 at some point.
I like that idea as well. He goes h4 and comes at it from the other side. Of course, Andrew doesn't react, driving it to h3, creating potential weakness on h2. e4, Andrew trying, but f4, that was a bit of a hasty decision. Now things are looking very, very grim. That pawn on e4 is very weak. Nihal could attack with knight c6, defending it as Andrew fg, though. Whoa, what a move, and rook e3, but he takes the other.
I think he could have played rook takes d2, f takes, and then the pawn on h3 goes free.
He could have, an fgh, that was a great catch, Mike, but now Andrew pushing his pawn. This is not over yet. He's got to take. But how do you stop the pawn? Rook b8. Okay, some active counterplay for Andrew, but will it be enough? I don't believe it will. e4, rook c5, though, rook c5. Oh my goodness, have the tables turned?
Yeah, and the black pawns are stymied.
Look at this. Moment. Look at this. This is incredible. Mike, your move was probably the cleanest shot that Nihal had, and now it might be a draw. Amazing.
The a pawn is still quite annoying. You're guarding the a6 square, so the white rook has trouble getting behind it, although there are some ways.
That's right. Who is better here? Definitely Nihal still pushing. This is practically speaking very hard to defend with such a bad pawn, but you can take on e4. This might fizzle out. Rook b4. Rook b4. Wow.
Found it. Still not that
Amazing.
easy, but he found
Still
it.
not easy.
Time to watch the Josh Friedel video on Chess.com. Still the industry standard on queen versus rook.
Wow. Now, does white have a fortress? Usually the way this is won, Mike, I think, is some sort of Zugzwang, forcing the king to disattach itself from the pawn. But it's not easy.
Yeah, whenever the pawn's forward, you can come at the king from behind. The h pawn, I think you just assume is not there. That can be won easily. So
right.
I'm not in my table base right now, but I do believe it's probably a win. Don't ask me how to do it. Josh, where are you?
Yeah. Hey, Josh. And he's using the queen, corkscrewing the queen around. Now he's shifting the king. It's so hard to find. I mean, 2 seconds, you can also blunder mate here. I mean, you can blunder the queen, you can mouse slip. This is, I mean, Black is not out of the woods. He's trying this way, that way. Will he get the king out of the range of the pawn? He does decide to take h2. Again, as you said, Mike, that's not the important part, though. Can you get to this pawn on f5?
Queen takes h2 was on move 99. So who's on the count to move 149?
Oh, my lands. That is, I mean, and he's going to make 50 moves here. He's going to try every which way. At some point, you could try to move the king to h4, cause some sort of zugzwang. He's done it. But Andrew does have an abundance of extra moves. How do you make progress?
Black king being on a more useful square, but it's really funny how white is never blocking with his rook on e6 because it's more useful to keep the black king stuck to the h-file.
Exactly. That's a great point. As long as the king is cut off. Queen d5, though, this could be zugzwang, but rook g5, that is an extra move for Andrew. Rook e6, he's done it. Now that is progress for Nihal. If he can get his king to g5, he does. Now, is it going to be still easy to win? Because rook against queen is not easy to win. Look at this expert play by Nihal. He gets his king into g5. He's going to win the pawn now. He's going to win the pawn. And this is looking grim.
30 moves remaining as I go grab my John Nunn book on the shelf. Oh, it's too far away. Let's just continue.
How about my Dvoretsky Endgame manual? He's made a lot of progress. It looks like he's going to win this pawn. He is. And defending this with 3 seconds, Mike, a computer can actually do a great job of defending this. But in a time scramble, it's virtually impossible to defend it as resiliently as possible. The only trick here, Mike, is some sort of stalemate trap where the rook gives itself away. Nihal will have to watch that, but he is making plenty of progress. King c6 wins. Wow.
Yeah, this is actually a computer workout on ChessKit. I have trouble beating the computer queen versus rook, and he's still got about 42 moves remaining before any kind of 50-move rule. There's a key position in the second rank defense where you try to you have to actually lose a tempo by triangulating your queen.
Right, but actually Andrew is doing a good job. He's managed to bring his king back
This might be the
in
triangulation.
contact.
And now I think you stair step your queen down the A and the B files.
Right, and fork the rook, and he's done it. Queen A1, Queen B1, amazing.
There it is.
In time pressure finding it, very nice catch, Mike. And this is game over. And what a Herculean effort, 145 moves by Nihal, jumping out on top, 4.5, 3.5, as the 5-minute section concludes. Amazing stuff from Nihal Sarin, and hats off to Andrew for an incredibly resilient defense as well.
Might be the longest 5-minute stretch in history because that last game overstepped the 5-minute section by so much. But amazing, 145 moves, and if there is a psychological advantage conferred by going into the break with a win, it's probably multiplied by that grind, by the fact that you did convert such a difficult ending. So 4.5 to 3.5, small lead for the #1 seed, but this is Virginia UMBC. Actually, it's not, because UMBC beat Virginia by like 20 points in that game. But this is the closest 1 versus 16 matchup, perhaps in Chess.com history.
And we expected action. We got action. And guess what? There's a lot more excitement ahead, as we will soon, after a quick break, begin the 3-minute portion. Only a 1-point lead by Nihal. Amazing 5-minute section here. And we will let the players catch their breaths. We will catch our own. And we will be back shortly with 60 minutes of the 3-minute portion. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Junior Speed Chess Championship sponsored by Chess Kid. It is my pleasure to be commentating along with FIDE Master Mike Klein, and we have the 3-minute portion coming right your way. But first, a couple of clarifications and notes. First and foremost, the Smarter Chess match prediction. Mike, talk us through what you see here, and has it aged well in the context of the 5-minute portion?
Pretty close. I mean, I don't think we got there in a way that many people would have thought we would have gotten there, which was Andrew being ahead or at least equal for most of the 5-1. In fact, the only lead that I believe Nihal has had is through 145 move final game. So Nihal was favored. He was favored by 2 points. He ended up only winning this section by 1 point. So he's still in the driver's seat, and you can see he's a favorite in every section. And if we look at the graph of the odds to win, he's actually, it looks like a little bit higher than when the event began, even though he only won that segment by 1 point. Anyway, well, he's creeping up. He's creeping up to back where he was pre-event. So I don't know, I'm a little bit surprised by that, because if Andrew goes into the bullet down 1, I find it hard to make Andrew the underdog. And right now, there's no reason to believe that Andrew is going to go into the bullet with any kind of sizable deficit the way he's playing.
No, absolutely. They're so evenly matched. And we just see every single game going into a time scramble. So to be honest with you, Mike, I like the concept of these predictions, but we've seen time and time again, it's so hard to make anything of it. It could swing either way. The pendulum swings back and forth. And we're sure to see some more amazing time scrambles in the 3-minute portion. So if you're planning on going anywhere, not that there's anything else going on, you're definitely staying here, because this is about to get really fascinating. And we have liftoff here with another one of these Retty sort of Englishy, kind of openings.
Yeah, so every opening's had the word ish at the end of it, because they've been more about setups than real openings. So 73% chance for Nihal to win, but 100% chance that we're going to have some fun and we're going to learn something. The big question is, when do I switch over from my Chess Kid hat to my Chess.com hat? So whose hat am I wearing for this segment? You want to go Chess.com?
I like both on you, Mike. They look good.
I'm going to go Chess.com, but maybe we'll switch back to Chess Kid if I'm feeling quite juvenile later on. And here we have that E3, G3 setup, which I have marked down as being the same as game 5, which Nihal won that game. I don't think he won because of the setup, but he did win the game nonetheless.
Right. And he decides to repeat it. We've seen the players being pretty principled here, both kind of drifting. Nihal has had a little bit more variation in his play than Andrew, but they're both drifting to sort of the same set of setups, with Andrew, of course, playing, as usual, his classical repertoire, sticking to the same openings. But again, Nihal taking the first sort of long think, and he decides to release the central tension with DC. We get this sort of hanging pawn structure here, with the C5 and D5 pawns sort of both being isolated. Now the rook lifting itself, I think, to D2 in order to put pressure, which Andrew curtails with knight E4. But he takes the foot off of the defense of the D5 pawn. One thing to consider for Nihal here, you could try to trade knights with knight C3 and sort of clear the path in preparation for putting pressure on this D5 pawn. We'll see what he does. He's done a different version of the same thing, maybe in order to open up the bishop's influence in the D5 pawn.
And although Danya is horrible at plugging his own book, I am going to plug my own website. We have all of our lessons structured in order on Chess Kid, and King Level 92 is all about hanging pawns. And if there's one idea I stressed in that video is you want the hanging pawns, you want one of the two to move, because then that releases the ability for them to control the other square. And when you blockade the hanging pawns, they're much more effectively targeted. They're wearing cement boots, as we would say in Chess Kid land. Ooh. So in many of the examples I showed, you want one of the two pawns to move, then they get stuck, and then you're able to gobble them up. So King Level 92, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go to chesskid.com/lessons, and you'll see what all the kids know about, which is all these great lessons on Chess Kid.
Absolutely. And I agree that I'm terrible at plugging my own stuff, but I am good at plugging other people's stuff. And I do regularly recommend Chess Kid material to my students. It's awesome stuff. So, if you're here to get better, it's amazing content and a lot of it on different topics. So I can throw my voice behind that as well, Mike. You're doing some awesome stuff. And Nihal seems to be doing some awesome stuff with those hanging pawns, as he has gotten rid of Andrew's dark squared bishop. Now, the knight on c4 is now hanging because the bishop on b7 is protected. But where will it go? Will it go to e5 or will it go to e3? Now, one thing to calculate, after knight e3, d4, notice that the queen is pinned, bishop takes d4, seems to be possible. It's complicated, though. He does go knight e3. Now, Andrew with a big choice on his hands. Does he go d4 and seek some sort of complications? I don't see a response to bishop takes d4. Or does he go something like rook c d8, trying to spring an x-ray, and after the captures, maybe knight b6. But here you have to pay attention to this pawn. Something like queen g4 could strike out of the blue, liberating the queen from the pin and threatening checkmate. A lot of things to calculate here, as both sides now have used more than half of their time, and Andrew going for the latter, defending the pawn.
Yeah, and by the way, if black had played knight b6 to defend, maybe white would have played b4 inducing c4, and then we get what I talked about, which is that you fix the pawns on one color, and then they permanently can't move and they become targets.
Mm-hmm. And so Andrew trying to avoid that with knight b6, but the queen is a little bit overloaded here. It is pinned, A, and B, it is guarding the f6 knight. If it leaves, and you have to take on f6 with a pawn, that would be a total disaster, given that this knight on e3 can jump to that f5 square, knight f5, as Grandmaster Feingold likes to say. Bishop e5 also to be considered here, just driving this bishop onto the outpost. Again, we have a situation where there's a lot of promising options, and it's so tempting to sink into a thought and you know, have 5 seconds by the end of your decision. So Nihal will have to find it in himself to follow his intuition. Already 38 seconds. Time flies so quickly when you're making one of these decisions, and it's easy, Mike, to be unsatisfied with every choice because you're looking for a knockout.
Yeah, hanging pawns notoriously difficult, but from my bird's eye view, or as millennials would say, a drone's eye view, they look weaker than strong, and in fact, they do get captured. In fact, Danya, I would say the transition to 3-minute stuff, because when you're playing 5 minutes for an hour and a half, you fall into a pace, and you have to remind yourself, especially in that first game, hey, I can't take 90 seconds on a move like I was able to in the opening segment.
Exactly. It sounds trivial, but it's not. It's just so hard to mentally adjust. And there's that cool concept in psychology. I think it's called like perseveration, where, you know, if you move to a different floor in your apartment building, first couple of times you're going to hit the button of that old floor in your elevator. So like your brain literally makes that connection to whatever you're familiar to. Obviously, it's on a lesser scale here, but it does exist. Now, we see Nihal has gone for this sort of materialistic approach. He's won a pawn, but now Andrew has sort of gotten rid of the tension in the center. He's traded some pieces, and he's going to go after the c4 pawn. It's going to be lost. What does Nihal do here? How does he squeeze the most out of the position? Obviously, Andrew should not take the queen. Then the pawn's going to come to b3 and defend c4. But which piece does he take c4 with? This is going to be in a very unpleasant endgame either way, and we see Nihal activating his other rook. He can trade one pair of rooks. He can also swing it to a5 and target the a6 pawn.
Danya, would you rather have the extra pawn, which may or may not be useful, or would you rather have the extra 20 seconds on your clock?
Definitely the extra pawn, because this endgame is so easy to play. Nihal could make a lot of sort of waiting moves and gain a little bit of time on his clock. We see here he is getting right to business. He's trading his double pawn. Andrew activating his pieces, which is what he should do. He might be going after the pawn on e2. This is going to be hard to win, Mike, especially with 13 seconds. What Nihal's trying to do is if rook a1, he's going to go rook c7 and double rooks on that d file. So Andrew has to reckon with that as well. He might have to keep one of his rooks for defensive purposes on e7, which is what he does with rook e7. Here we go. Okay.
And black is not wanting to allow that, obviously. That takes into account a lot of losing possibilities by allowing the double Pac-Man on the 7th rank.
Definitely. These endgames can be lost if you overpress. And we see Nihal continuing to chip away at Andrew's kingside. Andrew going for the rook trade. Actually, that's a great move, forcing the rook trade. And this definitely seems drawish, right? Because the rook on a4 is very active. It is holding down the rook on d2. Still attempts by Nihal. He can try to bring his king over to the other side of the board in order to free up his rook, which is exactly what he's doing. Andrew is following suit. We see the cat and mouse game in action here, under 10 seconds for both of them. Another time scramble. This is going to be definitely hard to defend. Objectively, though, I think it's a draw.
Yeah, there was a moment after king f5 that black allowed rook d5. It's not that Danya missed it. It's just that it would have lost the a pawn. And then if you put every pawn on the same side of the board, the winning chances go from 2% to nil.
Mm-hmm. And here we see Andrew continuing to activate his pieces. The rook from f3 to a3, swinging around, multitasking, holding down the rook on the second rank. The active pieces are everything in an endgame like this. I don't see a way for Nihal to make much progress. He's trying to induce Zugzwang. F4 can be considered by Andrew. The rook on F3, not only is it holding down White's rook, it's also cutting off White's king. And that is what seems to be the drawing factor. Nihal continuing to make attempts. What he could have done is potentially swung the rook to F4, but that could be losing. That's a pawn race. And let's see what he comes up with here. He might be succumbing to the inevitable, and we have a draw by repetition. Great save by Andrew. That looked very concerning in the middle game, but that decision to give away a pawn was actually a very savvy one, as the endgame gave him more chances. Drawn game.
Our first draw since the opening match. We had 7 straight consecutive wins by one player. You don't see that very often, but that just goes to show that there's been neither player has been willing to settle for equality or to trade down to a boring endgame as either color.
And we see another one of these interesting Nimzo-Indian lines where the queen is on d5, obviously not hanging because of the pin. But yeah, it's been incredibly combative, and it's been so close. Every single game just comes down to the wire, and we have every reason to believe that it will continue to do so. Okay, so Penguin now thinking, what does he do with the central tension? Does he go knight f3? Does he take on c5? He decides to go bishop d2, forcing the trade, and we have mass trades here. This looks pretty good for black, though. I think he's definitely equalized, despite white's 2 bishops. Bishop on c3, though, that's a pretty big asset for white.
Now explain, because I'm literally not asking this to set you up. I'm actually asking this based on my own knowledge of chess.
It's okay to set me up. That's fine.
White's got the bishop pair, probably the easiest access to the d file. The black bishop on c8 is going to have to find a way into the game, although I realize b7 looks reasonable. So why do you say that black is fine when it seems like white's got a lot of mini advantages?
Because of the possibility of going e5, right? Yeah. I think that and the lack of targets in black's position, a lot of times visually the position might seem better, and I think white has a small pull. But notice that black has no targets in his position to attack. So it might be a little bit passive, but if you can just weather the immediate storm, you'll eventually have a chance to develop your pieces, maybe take on e5 and go bishop d7. And I think, 50 years ago or so, people wouldn't go into such a position. But nowadays, with computers, with increased defensive capabilities, players have realized that these types of positions are actually tremendously solid, and they regularly go into them as black. With that being said, I'm not denying that I think white is definitely pressing here. I like Andrew's position, but I think Nihal can make a couple of accurate moves here. Maybe bishop d7, maybe take on e5, and then go bishop d7, and I think he should be able to hold.
All right, well, computers making their mark on chess, and Danya doing well. Notice no evaluation bar is really needed. This position's more about feel. And often, I have this problem, especially in my kids' streams. We don't use an evaluation bar, but there's a couple mistakes that a lot of viewers make, not just kids. They see the evaluation go from 1.5 to 1.3, and they're like, oh, white's blown the advantage, even though that's imperceptible. There's no grandmaster in the world that thinks, I'm probably up 1.5. No, I'm up 1.3. That's just not how humans think. And there's also some positions that, frankly, computers do not understand. They think that in opposite colored bishop endgames, that one side can be winning when any 1200 can look at it and say the extra pawn is worthless. And I could go on and on about these sorts of examples. So no evaluation bar today, but none needed. We've got one of the top American players, Danya Naroditsky, and I'm just here for trivia. I know my place. And in fact, it's time for trivia. We've been talking about books today.
Absolutely.
This trivia question is brought to you by Gregory Kaidanov. And he said, name a 2700 who has never read a book. Now, I realize the younger generation that may count for a lot of players. So here's the stipulation. I'm requiring that you pick a player above the age of 40. That's what makes it a surprising answer.
Okay. Wait, a former 2700 or a current one?
Former. So don't pick Anish Giri because he's not over the age of 40. Anish, if you're listening, hi. And don't pick a player who's only gotten to 2500. Now, this is incredibly hard.
I have a guess, but I'm not going to say it.
If you get this right, I will give you all of my wages for this commentary, Don.
Can I make a guess, or should I let the chat? I should probably let the chat think about this.
You can let the chat. Yeah, let's give the chat a minute. Let's go back to the game. And how about, we'll make the end of this game is when I'll give away the answer. So we'll do a regular commentary, and that'll give the chat about 3 minutes to plug in their answer.
Pretty good. Well, that's a fascinating question. And let's check back into this endgame as we see symmetrical piece balance here with knight, bishop, and rook against knight, bishop, and rook. Now, still, Andrew, we see both knights being attacked. If FEAB, And it seems like black's double pawns are more accessible than white's. So for that reason, Nihal dropping his knight back to d5. Still a pull, I think, for Andrew here, especially if he can get to the rook to c1 first. Bishop d7 could also be met with knight c5, hitting the bishop and drawing it back to c8. So still, we see these problems facing Nihal, but 36 seconds to a minute and 15, that's a pretty significant time advantage. Nihal has time to find a way out of this. I still think he should be equalizing, maybe king f7 and try to get the king into e7. But if rook c1, what could happen is e4, forcing the knight back, and then a penetration to c7 could happen. That could be a very much unwelcome sight for black. Let's see how Nihal solves these problems.
I can tell you, I won a lot of games as a junior by anticipating the endgame and already having my king ready. Now, it's well known that once the endgame happens, you should march your king to an active spot. But white is almost sneakily getting the king to an active spot before some trades happen. Unfortunately, even if I picture a chess position here with no pieces except the kings, there's not a lot that the white king can target. That's the sort of downfall of the king activity.
That's exactly right. And that's sort of the theme, right? The lack of targets. He does decide on king f7. Now, my question is, what does he want to do here against this idea of e4, which could be very unpleasant? Now, you could allow the rook infiltration to the 7th rank and then try to bring it back out with king d8. But, I mean, as they say, that's a little bit Monka-esque. So I think we'll see e4. Or bishop f3 is also good, because if you take, there we go, because if you take on d5, he brings his king in. But now this pawn is a little bit weak. We finally have a target. The question, will it be enough sufficient fodder for a winning attempt by Andrew? I don't think so, because this king, extremely well placed, Mike, to lend enough support to this pawn.
Yeah, but still, I don't know. I like this for white a lot. Your king can march to d4, or your knight can sit there forever. It seems like the kind of position you can torture your opponent, but torture does not always mean a full point.
Yeah, I think there's certain Soviet chess players who would salivate at the possibility of a position like this. But e4, wait a minute, e4 rook c. So if e4 rook c5 takes, if you take back, there's a fork because of the pin.
Right.
Did he blunder? Oh, I think that was a big chance by Andrew there, Mike. I'm not sure that was anticipated by Nihal, but he decides to keep the torture going, as you say. This is one of those positions you can make a million moves here. I agree. I think that white's got the practical chances. I think Nihal should be holding this if he's careful, but 4 seconds on the clock. It is so easy to blunder or allow something.
Yeah, and Nihal just got done torturing in the final 5-minute game of that queen versus rook, and it looks like the torturer is going to become the torturee. I'm not sure those are words, but we're making stuff up here. I went to a liberal arts college, so I'm supposed to know this stuff, but I don't.
Well, so am I, and I don't either. So we're in the same boat here.
Okay.
Mike.
Don't sleep on the king side pawns, actually. Those could become targets at one point, too.
And look at him swinging the rook around. He said, maybe bring the king to d4. And you got to be careful. You can get checkmated on c4. b4 is a very committal move because you're allowing the rook potentially to come to c4. g5, here we go. Now, has Andrew overpressed after bishop a4? He's got to be very careful. That other flank could cost him bishop a4. Now the rook coming to c2. I think he's got a little bit wrong. He's making space for the rook to come to d2. Ooh. But now bishop d1 is a threat if the rook moves. Okay, dropping his knight back to f5, king e5, centralizing king g4. What's going on here? Bishop d7. I think black is better. Rook c2. He's taking a pawn.
Like a self-mate puzzle happening here.
Wow. Now look at black's stroke. There's a pawn majority. Andrew has let this out of control completely. But he has a passed pawn. He's got to push it. Oh my goodness. And we've seen a case of overpressing. Now black's pawn runs. It's more far advanced. White is sandwiched in there with his king. This is losing now for Andrew. And wow. d2 and bishop d5 intercepting the rook. He's going to promote. Amazing. Knight f4, last chance. d1 queen, though, wins the game. He is simply going to give up his queen, take the pawn, and win by giving his rook up 4. White's passer, and Nihal wins it. Unbelievable win. Wow. No words, Mike. Crazy.
Nice call at the end. Nihal takes his biggest lead of the match, a 2-game win. And we've had 2 major themes this match. We've had wedge pawns, and we've also had inability to convert better positions. White, we thought, was slightly better the entire game and wasn't able to pull it out. So let's hear it for the counterattackers of the world, because they're the ones getting the job done today.
Absolutely. And Andrew, we see him throwing stuff around his room. He is raging. Just look at his face. He is so unhappy. He was just banging his table. Just kidding. We see why he is one of the most level-headed players out there. Now, Mike, you made us a promise, okay? And I'm not going to let you not fulfill that promise. So we need the reveal of the player who's over 27, who was over 27, who's never read a chess book.
All
Now,
right. Well,
could I give you my guess?
yeah, you can. Let me say the guesses from the chat, then you can take your guess. Somebody said
Definitely.
Kaidanov. No, I said he was the trivia giver. Okay. The funniest answer was Claude Bloodgood, who was serving a life sentence in prison when he got his USCF rating
But he's written a book.
to about 2690. Did he? Famously did not get invited to the U.S. Championship because he was in prison. He was never 2,700 FIDE, although a very funny guess. Somebody said Paul Morphy. No, we didn't have ratings back then. So nobody got the answer right. It wasn't Ivanchuk. What is your guess, Danya?
I was going to guess Peruvian Grandmaster Julio Granda Zuniga.
That's it. You get my paycheck.
Oh, we actually have forced a draw. Just got it, believe it or not.
How did you know Julio Granda Zuniga was the answer?
So I've actually played him a couple of times. And when I was playing him, and the first time I played him was 2011, I did some research while I was preparing for the game, and I found some stories that he was one of the most unconventional. He had one of the most unconventional paths to the top, where he basically had never read a chess book. I read some interview with him in preparation for my game with him, and I ended up playing him twice. So I have some personal experience. So it's not like it's that impressive. I just played him. I did some preparation and some research.
And this is the exception that proves the rule. Everybody out there, chess books are good, as are lots of online learning resources, of course. But I guess the good news, well, I'm happy you got my question right. I wasn't rooting against you, but that does confirm the trivia question by Kaidanov, that Julio Granda Zuniga of Peru, who did make 2,700 in this decade, or I guess I should say last decade, he just barely got above it. I never read a chess book, but pretty amazing stuff.
Well, Mike, I miss our trivia nights at the Castle Chess Camp in Atlanta, the geography trivia. So that is something we'll have to recreate. That's an awesome question. Mm-hmm.
I asked the players before the tournament, name a hidden skill that you have. And Nihal wrote back to me, and he said that he knows, quote, quite a few world capitals.
Oh, I'm going to have to test that. Now, if I may appoint myself as the ultimate tester of that, I will.
I know you're awesome. I think Nihal may have been underselling. Not that we should take Wikipedia with a grain of salt, but if you go to Nihal's Wikipedia page, it says that he could name 190 world capitals and country flags by the age of 3.
Oh my, did you say 3?
Now, this is Wikipedia. I don't know how we're going to be able to confirm this.
I think we're asking that question in the interview.
Yeah, Nihal, if your parents are in the chat, Mr. and Mrs. Sarin, I don't know how life is in Kerala these days. I hope it's great. Tell me in the chat if, in fact, this story is true.
Are you kidding me? Now Nihal was already impressing me before, but if this is even halfway true, even if he knew them by the age of 9, that is incredible.
Yeah, we'll give him some tough country capitals.
Yeah, let's think of some Burundi. Got to think of some good ones.
All right, yeah. So we have asymmetrical pawn structure, equal material in the ending, and we have the white rooks bearing down on c5, although if there's one strong point in black's defense, it is c5. I guess one of the questions I would have is white preparing b4 or d4?
Yeah, he definitely is. And by the way, one potential trick is to ask him a country whose capital has recently changed, such as Kazakhstan. And I think there were a couple of others whose capital changed. I think, don't quote me on this, but Burma or Myanmar, that capital has changed recently as well. Anyways, yes,
changing, you're right.
To answer your question, I think he is preparing b4 in order to potentially carve out, and he's not trying to win the pawn on c5 so much as he is trying to carve out that d4 square for his knight. What black could do is simply not react. For example, if you go b4, I could drop my king to d6, and this pawn on c5 is very, very well protected. White could still put the knight on d4 because of the pin, but again, it doesn't do much. So Andrew potentially eyeing the possibility of creating a passer with h5. So let's see how Nihal handles that. And now a knight trade on the cards, which would seem to get a relatively drawish. Now what Nihal could do is go king f3, rook h2, and actually target that pawn. So maybe he does have a slight pull here.
Battle of the Rook endgame so far in the 3-minute segment, and I'm not sure what the odds are so far, but Nihal's been doing just fine in the 3-minute. We've been making a joke about not wanting to be the better player and not wanting to be the person pressing. I'm not sure who I like in this endgame. It might just be that they each have a weak pawn and they're going to toggle. Let's see, neither one has been that willing to bail out into a draw, and there we go, e4. Nihal not happy with the repetition and is going to go for a passer with e5, I think.
and look at those pawns. Now, the one drawback of that, right, is this f4 pawn is a little bit weak and could be targeted with rook h to f8. But even if you do that, there might be a possibility of going f5 check. We'll get into that if it happens. In the meantime, Nihal sidestepping the pin. He's preparing something like f5 against, maybe he's preparing f5 even without rook f8. Andrew trying to cut into that pawn failings with h5. Very good move. Maybe f5 should be considered here by Nihal. Let's see what he does. Very, very structurally complex position. He does play f5. I really like his position here. Look at these pawns. Notice the pin does not allow black to take on g4 here. He takes on f5. Now e takes f5 would create the possibility of rook e6 check. Andrew going after the pawns. Now rook g6 is going to be very powerful. This is going to be a devastating move. Rook g6 intercepting black's rook. Mike, this seems to be spiraling out of control.
Do you trade and play h4? I'm wondering if you trade and play h4 just to prevent white from getting connected passers. Okay, he's actually just going to give
definitely a practical chance, yeah. But now maybe g5. Even rook takes h5 simply, and even if black takes, you get not passed pawns but two very far advanced pawns. Spoiled for choice is Nihal. He does go for this. Also, b6 is hanging. This is definitely losing for Andrew. I'm not seeing even a way for him to get practical chances. Maybe he should go after the pawn as he is, king f4, or even king h4, to prevent the rook later on from stopping a pawn with rook h3 should be considered. So Nihal definitely thinking about that.
2-to-1 time advantage as well.
He can also go king f4 and king takes e3, take the other rook. He goes king h4. Okay, let's see. h6 and maybe rook to g3 to intercept black's rook is what he wants. Let's see. I think rook g3 is what he wants. He does.
Yeah, and the rook's got to go to e1 and e8 only. Well, I thought that was the only option. Okay, now he's
then h7, king g5, incredibly well calculated. Andrew has got to activate his passers, but not fast enough, and he resigns. Amazing endgame performance by Nihal. And now, Mike, this is getting concerning for Grandmaster Tang, as a 3-point lead has been opened up by Nihal Sarin.
Exactly. Nihal's won 4.5 out of the last 5 to go from a 2-point deficit to a 3-point advantage. Maybe I get my math wrong there. Yeah, I think he was actually only down 1 game. So he was down 1. Now he's up 3 thanks to having an undefeated final 5 games. And don't know what the match predictions are looking like now, but I would have to say that Nihal is probably up above 80%. We'll see if Smarter Chess can confirm that.
And this is a pivotal moment. This is where Andrew has got to stop the bleeding. There is something unsettling about being down 8-4, right? You're almost lapping your opponent. And if you win a game here, it's only 2 points. To me, Mike, and I don't want to do overly, over prediction, but it seems like Andrew with the white pieces here has to try to score a victory.
And there we go. There we see the talking head of Nihal Sarin continually inching higher, and he's climbing a mountain while Andrew's down in the valley. So rarefied air for the #1 player, the 16-year-old getting the best of the 20-year-old thus far. How much, you covered the entire knockout. How much was Andrew challenged? He had 3 matches on the knockout stage. Is that right?
Yeah, and it was extremely close in all of them.
Okay.
Particularly, I think, and don't quote me on this, the second match against Van Nguyen from the Czech Republic was very close. It was back and forth. Now, we saw a little bit of nervousness from Andrew in the beginning. He was even losing a couple of games on time. But then by the end, he kind of settled into his groove, and the final was an incredible display by Andrew. So he's one of those players. I actually played a match against Andrew a couple of months ago as part of my series of matches. And at one point I was up, I think 5 or 6 points going into the bullet segment, which was actually 30-second chess. And Andrew mounted a comeback. He won 5 in a row, and he brought the lead back down to 1. So he is more than capable of it. By the way, what happens if Nihal takes everything and then takes on c5 using this pin against white's queen? I feel like Andrew may have blundered here. Let's see. I think he blundered that. This is very concerning now.
We had another B pawn that was poisoned there after c5. Black didn't even have to take a half a second to avoid queen takes b3, where bishop d1 would have become a problem. So just another queen trap. We saw that, I believe, in game 1 of the match. But Black wasn't falling for it here. Nihal too strong for that.
Exactly. And Andrew definitely has recognized that he could take with the bishop, but that does not help. Something like this might be the lesser evil. Also look at the d5 square. That is a huge blockading square for a potential black knight that could swing itself around to d5. So positional advantage as well on top of this. This is highly, highly unsettling for Andrew now as Nihal goes for it. and he can now swing his knight around from d7 to f6 to d5, shutting the doors on any counterplay connected with this active bishop on b2.
You can see Andrew touching his face and his lips there. That's about as concerned as it looks like he gets. Is that some sort of certificate in the background? Is that like his grandmaster certificate?
Yeah, probably. I see it always in his streams.
Okay. Maybe intimidating his opponent with his FIDE GM cert, except they've all got it. That's the problem. We've got 16 players and 16 GMs.
Now, this would be bad even if Nihal were not up a pawn. This is a disastrous, disastrous position. Look at all of Black's pieces. Harmonious. This d4 pawn is on the verge of collapse. And Andrew has got to pull a miracle here in this game to try to get this match under control, to stop the bleeding. Yeah, and he tries to go into the opposite colored bishop endgame. But the problem is it's not an endgame. There's rooks and the queens still left on the board. I suppose there are some drawish tendencies, but it looks like he's going to lose this pawn on d4 as well.
Yeah, and although we've not had a Scandinavian, any member of Team Scandi will definitely appreciate the pawn structure for Black, because this happens a lot in that opening where you plant your pawns on c6 and e6 and you target the d4 pawn. The difference is White usually at least has a c pawn to defend it. And now that that c pawn's been chopped out, it's like Team Scandi on steroids. So a bit of a strange illusion, but I think the pawn structure does bear mentioning.
No, and, definitely.
We had one opposite colored bishop middle game back in game 2 that Andrew Tang won, but this is not that game. There's no queens on the board. We're closer to the end game than we are the middle game. And the d4 pawn, he's not getting any safer. He's going to be weak from now until the next millennium.
Indeed, indeed. And well, Andrew may be hoping that certificate is going to give him some strength, but wow. And I mean, John Bartholomew, like you said, Mike, Team Scandi, he would love this position. I mean, hey guys, John, let's just take on d4 here. We got some blockade going, guys. All right, take the pawn, guys. Yeah, but this is like a dream scenario. Now, again, if you take on d4 with the bishop, the one issue, if you move the bishop away, it could lead to a trade of rooks. And we are zooming in. Look at the camera angles here. Amazing stuff. We're trying to get a sense of
I think it's the FIDE logo. I mean, it's got
of what it says. All right, Andrew, can you just move your face a little bit? Yeah, it definitely is something FIDE related.
Okay. And by the way,
I think it's the GM title. It's got to be the GM certificate.
John was one of the first coaches, I believe, of Andrew, although John is not going to want to watch this position. This is not what you want. Now, Black
it is the GM certificate. I can confirm. This is what mine looks like too. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, this is what my FIDE pin looks like. My Fun Master pin. It's the only Fun Master pin in the world, I assure you. Don't look at it too closely. Black can play pawn to e5 here, supporting the bishop, thus trying to avoid the mass trade of rooks. And by the way, sometimes people say, Fun Master Mike, how'd you get that name? Danya, it actually happened at the castle camp. Because I was surrounded by grandmasters, all the kids were asking me one day, hey, FM, what's that stand for? And I just said, oh, it stands for Fun Master. And it just stuck. So
interesting. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. And I like it, Fun Master Mike. Has a certain ring to it. Now, here's the problem for Andrew. Now, if Nihal trades rooks, that could still be losing for White. Look at these pawns. They're all in dark squares. And here we go. Nihal's still not trading them. He's using his king in a very savvy manner to take the pawn. This is definitely losing for White. On top of it, Andrew, 6 seconds. He's desperately trying to create something, but Nihal is simply too solid here. A6 trading pawns. Good try, but I'm afraid it's not going to be enough. This king could also infiltrate to f4.
And again, keep the rooks on the board. Give yourself 2 chances to win. You're going to win either on the clock or on the board.
Right.
There's always that small chance if you trade rooks that White can set up some amazing fortress. But keep the rooks on the board. Okay, now the rooks are gone, but I don't believe there's a fortress when the Black king is so active.
And you could go a5. You could even preserve the other pawn. Not that you would need it. He goes bishop h4. I don't know why he didn't keep the a pawn, honestly, but this is a kind of famously winning endgame. The strategy is you move these pawns. Now, without the pair of b pawns, sometimes this is a draw because the bishop could give itself away for 2 pawns. Obviously here, even if the bishop does give itself away, Black is going to have that b pawn remaining. So this is a very elementary win. This is almost checkmate. As you can see, White cannot hold these pawns together. They are going to push whether White likes it or not.
And the
so
key
we're about to see another victory.
When the pawns are side by side, you should always push your pawns to the light squares because they'll have no trouble advancing to the dark squares. So for all of our fans that are listening that are a little bit new to bishop endgames, watch how black keeps doing it. There's no problem getting those pawns to f2 and g3 because that's the color you control. If you would push the opposite way, a blockade could be set up. And once again, black does it for the third time. Black, well, he's about to. I forgot we're in analysis mode, but yeah.
Yeah, and there we go. That is official. He promotes, does Nihal 8-4, ladies and gentlemen, as this is spiraling rapidly out of control with 27 minutes left in the 3-minute portion. Andrew has got to make this a little bit closer. I still think he's the favorite of the bullet. I think that is his chance. But with how good Nihal is, I mean, he's got to bring this at least to 2.
And get your hi-hat drums ready because Andrew is bringing, messed up the joke. Andrew is breathing sarin gas. We were waiting to say it. I think now's a good time to say it.
It is a good time to say it.
5.5 out of the last 6 for the young superstar from Kerala, the #1 seed, showing why he deserves that title. It was very close for the first 85 minutes of this match until Nihal won a queen versus rook pawnless ending in the final game of the 5-minute, and then he's taken 3.5 out of 4 in the 3-minute.
Indeed, indeed. And as the game is in its opening stages, let us remind you very quickly of what these players are facing off for. We have some amazing prizes at every stage. We can see that basically the winner of the finals gets a cool $2,500 and what might be even more important for the players, qualification to the Speed Chess Championship. And also important to notice is that all of the games will be played even if the match is decided because a percentage of the prize fund goes based on the actual match score. So there's always incentive to win games, even if the actual results of the match has been decided. So a lot to play for here. And these players, Mike, are just putting themselves on the line.
Yeah, so we're not going to see anybody that's mathematically eliminated play the Grob or anything like that. Well, right. unless they don't care about the $50 that they're losing by losing to a higher match percentage. So $50 to kids these days is important. It should also be said that these players are not making anything in over-the-board tournaments right now because they haven't existed. So, internet chess is a bigger and bigger deal.
It really is. It's great to see, the adaptation process taking place so quickly in a very, very difficult time for us all. So many opportunities for these young players who, of course, the progress of many of them is curtailed by the absence of over-the-board tournaments. Very, very difficult on so many players who were at the apex of their chess careers using this time to gain rating and to become grandmasters. So not an easy time, but it's good to see Chess.com doing as much as it can to offer opportunities for these young players who are hungering for competitive tournaments.
An interesting moment that just passed us by. The knight took on d4. However, if white had taken with the pawn, the white pawn would have been blockaded so easily. That is a completely unideal isolated queen pawn position. So white is instead opted for taking with the pawn, keeping the pawn symmetrical, but you can see how his pieces are invading nonetheless.
Now, wait a minute here. Bishop b5, speaking of invading, is Nihal simply winning a piece there? Because notice, the knight cannot move. The bishop will be dropped. So white is attacking that bishop, and I don't see a good way to defend that knight. Bishop c8, I'm not even considering. Look at knight c6. This is going to be a disaster. So I'm pretty sure that Nihal is trying to figure out whether Andrew has anything up his sleeve against bishop b5. Right off the top of my head, I don't see anything. Now, there is a weakness of the back rank that white has, so there might be some sort of hidden tactic here. But if there is, I'm not seeing maybe a6 and then bishop d6 trying to get white's rook out. But even rook takes b7 leads to 2 pieces for a rook at the very minimum, and I'm sure there's better than that. So Nihal taking his time here, but bishop b5 actually might be a crushing blow. And if he wins this game, that would be a 5-point lead. Andrew, you can't read anything by his facial expression, but Mike, he does seem to be a little bit unsettled here.
He just threw himself back in his chair in a way that suggests, oh no, what's about to befall me. Nihal looks about as intense as ever, not in a menacing way, but in a man that you could tap him on the shoulder right now and he may not even react. He's that glued.
That's it. He's locked in. Knight takes e6 is also a move with queen g4 to follow. A lot of threats here. So now that I'm looking at it, that might be sort of a quote-unquote safer alternative, and he does it. So he goes for knight takes e6. Beautiful idea here by Nihal with queen g4 to follow. Now the point is, after fe queen g4, and that's what he was calculating. Maybe there was something about bishop b5 he didn't like. I don't blame him because you're threatening mate. and you're threatening the pawn on e6, but it's not about the pawn. If you take that pawn, you also fork the knight. There's a million threats looming. Another thing to notice here, now the king walks into a pin. Boom, queen takes h6 goes the dynamite with bishop c4 to follow. This looks like a complete disaster for Andrew.
That's pretty brutal, and I would almost argue that in a situation where both might be winning, he might just be trying to figure out which one is easier to analyze. And this may be easier. You had to show a couple of different variations after bishop b5 that were a little tricky. Here, it's very forcing because bishop b5, it's not as threatening as knight takes e6 because you're hitting the rook and you're hitting g7. I don't see what you do if you don't take this knight. You can't allow knight takes e7.
I was thinking briefly about knight to c5, trying to kind of entomb this rook. But again, it's so deflating because at the very minimum, white can give this rook back up and he's up a pawn. I'm sure that that is not the best white can do. But maybe that is the lesser evil for Andrew. I don't know. Perhaps knight c5 has the effect of muddying the waters. Nihal does have 32 seconds. So Andrew looking desperately for some way to make things a little bit complicated. Let's see what he chooses.
Yeah, I was almost wondering if knight c5, if you could go crazy and play queen g4. Now, that's not a very good game management move. But after knight takes knight, rook takes bishop on e7, threatening rook takes the knight. And yeah, and you do have back rank mate covered. Again, I'm not sure if it's the best from a game management perspective, but it might work out. So if anybody at home, quote, cheating with your eval bar on.
Yeah, and he's gone for f8, but 1 second for Andrew, and he succumbs to the inevitable. This actually might happen. Queen and he goes king h7 to avoid, but now e5 can come in with queen g6 to follow. That is just going to be immediate checkmate, I think, for Nihal. He goes queen f5 first, and then e5, I think, will follow. We're going to see a resignation from Andrew if that happens. He doesn't even have to do that. He can go, yeah, and he does. Beautiful. Beautifully conducted attack by Nihal. So smooth. And a 5-point lead, Mike, with how much time left? I think right around 20 minutes left. We're going to confirm that in a second in the 3-minute portion. It's never over till it's over. Mike, you referenced before the biggest comebacks ever made in the Speed Chess Championship. Could you remind us of the range that has been, that people have come back from?
Yeah, there's been at least one 4-point comeback and at least one 5. This was confirmed by Smarter Chess, and this is jogging my memory back a long time. I believe the 5-point comeback was turned in by international master Yakov Norowitz, who beat the Chicago Grandmaster. Of course, my mind would blank. Avruk. Yes, Boris Avruk was the opponent. Kind of surprising, but Norowitz is known for his internet chess. I believe that was a 5-game comeback. Now, interestingly, in Crush against Tatiana Kazintseva, Crush had to win her final 5 games in the bullet, and I think she beat Kazintseva by 1 game. So it was a literal last chance comeback.
No.
And unlike every other nice story about Charlotte, Tatiana Kazintseva played her match at the Charlotte Chess Center. So it's about the one negative thing we can say about the city of Charlotte today.
And the Chess Center is an amazing place as well. So play your matches for the Charlotte Chess Center.
So, it's going to take a historic comeback. Let me ask the chat, because we could speculate all day. Things were close up until the 90-minute mark. What do you think has changed in this match to allow Nihal Sarin to win 6.5 out of 7? I'd like to hear from our chat. You guys get to be our mock commentators in the chat. Let me know what you think. Was it an opening choice? Was it a time management choice? Was it something else? Because you've had the luxury of pontificating while we've been trying to talk our way through this. Maybe you can let me know.
Absolutely. And we thank the thousands of you who are still here with us watching this fascinating match unfold. I have a feeling that there's a lot of action left. I'm not going to put words in the chat's mouth, but I have a feeling that there is going to be some intrigue here as we have an interesting Slav. So looking forward to seeing people's opinion. Yeah, it's a great question. What seemed to change? Because it seemed to be so subtle, and all of a sudden, boom, 5-point lead.
Yeah, and maybe the sample size is too small to make a definitive statement about why. I mean, in fact, the funny thing is, were it not for the draw in Game 9, Nihal would have done a Fabiano. And by that, of course, I mean win 7 in a row. But if you were to ask, why did Fabiano win 7 in a row in 2014? I don't know. I mean, the sample size is pretty small. He's always been Fabiano. But maybe there's a reason. There sometimes is a collective thread as to why.
That was crazy, Fabiano. That brings back some amazing memories. Another memory that I had of a comeback in the Speed Chess Championship, which was not technically speaking a historic comeback size-wise, but match between Jan Krzysztof Duda and Alexander Grishuk.
Mm-hmm.
I think Grishuk was up. Don't quote me on this, and I've said that multiple times, but really don't quote me on this. I think he was up 3 points with like 5 minutes left in the bullet, and Duda came back and won 4 in a row. It was I was watching that from the Charlotte Chess Center. So the Charlotte Chess Center seems to be involved in some way, shape, or form in these comebacks. Maybe I should make my way to the Chess Center right now. I'm pretty close.
I do remember that match. You would not have expected the veteran, I'm not going to use the word collapse, but to allow that kind of comeback. But Grishuk's a very uncompromising player. He's not the kind of person that says, I'm up 3, I'm going to change my openings and try to manage this match. I mean, Grishuk, he gets what you think he's going to give you. That's why he's so exciting to watch.
Indeed, we all love Sasha, and I tried to win the match, but Jan Krzysztof came back a little bit, but this is kind of what makes me strong. So, but here we will see what Andrew can bring to the table. But anyways, we have Nihal with 40 seconds now. This is actually a shot for Andrew. He seems to have a good position despite, is he down a pawn? No, he's not down a pawn. So Nihal's pawn structure is definitely, something went wrong for him in the opening. Andrew has great central control. Let's see if he can activate his pieces. That knight on c1 is a little bit stranded. This knight on a5 is pressuring the b3 square. So Andrew, yep, he's protecting d4. He's preparing queen c2 and rook d1.
15 minutes left in this portion, and I've got to believe that Andrew's got to get this margin down to at least 3 games. He's at 5 right now, but I think 3 is the number that he should be shooting for.
Definitely, 3 is definitely surmountable. So he needs to take this 1 game at a time, maneuvering here. But Nihal is, of course, so strong in bullet as well, and just the way he's played here, he's fast. I mean, he's calculating swiftly. He's not making any careless mistakes. And here we see him actually sacking a pawn, and he's probably just trying to open up the c file for his rook, maybe cement the bishop with a5 at the end. Now, the problem is, at the end of this line, this knight on b6 could end up being hanging, and d5 could follow. So he's got to be very careful about that. I'm not exactly sure. Oh, what he wants is to take on c3 and go bishop a4 and pin the rook. Wow, what an idea. I'm telling you, he's finding some incredibly creative ideas. But Andrew taking the pawn on a7, sidestepping that minefield. So definitely big time advantage here for Andrew, and almost no time remaining for Nihal. This is a game that he simply must carry home.
Yeah, and another annoying thing for black is that you always have to look for the center pawns advancing. Like every single turn, it's going to burn time on your clock. One of the other problems with your opponent having what we call in chess kid land the snowplow. The 2 pawns side by side in the middle, because they tend to push stuff out of the way. And there we go. The snowplow. By the way, it did snow in Colorado the other day. Somehow that's happening in the world in September. And the snowplow here amounts to the bishop's breaking through. The rook has come up and over. And some sort of queen c6, rook takes h6 ideas in the offing. All kinds of fun for the white pieces.
Absolutely. Queen c3 is also an idea at some point, threatening rook takes h6 mate. And I like that you have names for these things that we all kind of know, but don't have names in standard chess nomenclature. So the snowplow indeed serving Andrew well here. And now he's got all sorts of mating ideas. h5, brilliant positional game thus far. He's just got to take it home. Nihal is so hard to bring down. And here we see he's creating some threats. So rook e8 would win, I think, on the spot. But there is some stuff to calculate. Queen f4. Andrew choosing to play. Oh, rook takes h6.
Yeah. That's
but simply GF.
Carlsen Karyakin final game of the World Championship was rook takes h6. And there we go.
Exactly.
Different position here, but rook h6 wins another important game.
It does, and Andrew brings this to 4. Now, would you say this is another must-win game? If he is able to win this one, that gives him even some time in the 3-minute portion. So, important game for both players here. As Nihal goes back to his trusty Reti with b3, is he going to double fianchetto again? He's won some nice games in that line. He's gotten some good positions. Andrew this time trying to curtail it by playing bishop g4. Now playing g3 doesn't make much sense because of this pin.
Yeah, you're asking for trouble. I wouldn't call it must win because I look at the match clock with 12 minutes and I think, this is probably going to be this game and maybe 2 or 3 others. So I'm not going to go so far as to say must win. I know we use that term a lot, but it would be nice to win. It'd be really nice if your name is Andrew Tang. By the way, you said something interesting about the fact that we have names for things. I think it's really nice for kids to be able to say, snowplow, stuff like that. But I'll also say that you don't have to have funny names to be good. And I'll tell you how I know this. I was on the set for Garry Kasparov's masterclass, and he actually said when he learned chess in Russian, they did not differentiate between pin and skewer.
They don't. They still don't.
They just called line attacks, he said.
This is hilarious. I always have trouble, even in my streams. I confuse the two. Even now, I will say skewer when I mean pin and pin when I mean skewer, because in Russian, there's only one word svazka that describes both. So, fun fact, I can totally contest to that because I also learned chess in Russian. And there is indeed only one word for both.
Yeah, and decoy, deflection, they're all kind of the same thing. So you don't necessarily need to know the terms. However, when you're making funny videos like I do, which is pretty much my whole life, having a snowplow go across the screen has a little bit more memory for a kid than just using a big 4-syllable word.
That's exactly right. And decoy, I always say the word distraction, which I don't think is a formal name for anything, but in Russian, that word for decoy, deflection literally means distraction. So I always use that. But I completely agree with you, Mike, and it could really help, I think, kids learn positional chess when you have, somewhat fun names to refer to things. They can sort of more specifically understand certain content. So I think that's fantastic work, and it really is. It's awesome.
Now, there is one time, Danya, where you have to get the word right, and this is a fantastic story. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she was meeting with the Russian Secretary of State.
It is.
Sergei Lavrov, and she was trying to tell her counterpart, hey, let's reset relations with our countries. And she accidentally had one of her assistants that spoke Russian misinterpret a word, which is a chess word. I believe the little button that she presented said perizagruska instead of perizagruska.
Exactly.
And she was telling her counterpart, I'd like to overload relations, not reset relations. So can you confirm, though, is the Russian word for overload perigruska?
Perigruska, yeah. So you can say like fierz perigružen, like the queen is overloaded. Now, but the thing is, the word perizagruska is incredibly rare. So it's already asking for trouble. Like that is a very abstract, kind of an esoteric word that's not used often. So it was already a weird choice to begin with. And Russian it's the kind of language where you can switch around one syllable, one letter, and it really changes the meaning of the word. I do remember that story, actually. Yeah.
And we've got national master and chess kid star Brewington Hardaway, the former top 10-year-old in the USA, has joined us in the chat. We're probably overloading him with Russian language lessons. So back to our game. We have a symmetrical pawn structure, a little more space for white, and what I see are very strong pieces in the center, but I like the white knight on e5 even more than black's bishop on e4.
Yeah, and what Nihal could consider playing f3 and drop, and then this bishop on d5. We've seen this before. It could actually get sort of stranded in the center. So Andrew actually, we have a trade, and Nihal is definitely pressing here. Look at this knight on the 2. It could jump to a5, and it could start pressuring black's pawn. So the sort of symmetrical position does not tell the whole story. Andrew has some work to do in order to draw this and hold his own. He could consider trading rooks and then defending the pawn. One thing that could happen, if you trade rooks and go b6, the knight could start hunting down these pawns. Let's see what he does. This has happened. So knight c8 is interesting. I'm not sure that it gives enough to be able to generate true winning chances, but this is going to get interesting for sure.
And let me just cue up Brewington Hardaway here, chess kid star. Who do you like in this position, Brewington? Do you agree with the analysis, or do you want to go your own way? I'm going to let you type in the chat there. I'll read whatever you type in. Probably a little too early for match management, but this game has gone on so long. Last time I took a look at the match clock, we had dipped below 8 minutes. It's very possible that there will only be one more 3-minute game after this one. And if you're the leader, generally you do want longer games. That shortens the number of remaining games in the match. So I think it's still a little early to do game management or match management in the 3-minute segment, but it certainly doesn't hurt Nihal that these games are going so long.
Interesting. And by the way, this king from f1, it could walk all the way to a6 potentially, using those light squares as a passageway and applying pressure on black's pawns. So let's see what Nihal comes up with. Andrew pressed to the back of the wall here. He's kind of paralyzed, but I'm curious what Brewington thinks about this position as well.
Yeah, and actually, that's a funny reason why you may not want to play knight takes b8 so soon, because after knight takes, it does cover the a6 square. So maybe you wait for your king to get to a6 before you take. Now, I doubt that black is just going to sit there and allow all that to happen, but the knight is in no hurry to take the bishop on b8.
Yeah, it's incredible how paralyzed black is. He literally cannot dislodge the knight from c6. Can't move the knight, can't get the king to attack the knight. This and f4 further restricting black's position, stopping ideas of knight e5 is Nihal. Now, he is saddling himself with this potential weakness, but if you go e5, look at this position. Incredible. Andrew might at some point have to part ways with one of his queenside pawns, but that is a disastrous loss in an endgame. I think he's simply lost. I think that this is simply winning for white.
Yeah, black is really not able to find any space here. By the way, Brewington does concur. He likes white more. And if you want to play Brewington, he plays every Saturday in the month of September on Chess Kid. Go to the Chess Kid calendar and see when he's playing next. However, what we're focusing on right now are two of the best grandmasters in the world, especially when it comes to online chess. But we see Nihal Sarin looking to put the match back to the 5-point margin.
Indeed, and just one more shout out to Brewington. I had the privilege of commentating the Denker and Rockefeller tournaments a couple of weeks back, and I was quite impressed with Brewington's play throughout the tournament. So definitely a shining star of American chess. Best wishes to you on your path. And here we see Nihal taking the king's path to c4. He's going to take one of these pawns. The bishop is going to drop back to f2 in order to restrict black's king from coming to h4. Here we see a pass pawn being created. This is definitely completely winning for white. Black's king is simply not in time. He's too cramped. The e6 pawn is weak. Black is on his back foot, on his last legs. This pawn is running. This game is over.
I agree. We were remiss if we didn't say that the reason that white won a pawn is because the knight was Perigruska.
Yeah, exactly. This is Perigruska very much. Yeah, and another win here for Nihal, extending this lead, pushing it back up to 5, and quite possibly the last game, Mike, of the 3-minute portion is upon us.
Right. They will Perizagruska the pieces for one more game.
Right.
We'll go back. I only know 2 Russian words. They happen to be very complicated Russian words. But a 5-point lead, nobody's ever come back from a greater margin than 5 points. And it looks like the odds are 86%. I'm actually surprised they're not higher. But 86% odds for Nihal Sarin. That means he's going to win approximately 7 out of 8 matches where he has a 5-point lead at this segment. I'm really surprised we're not up above 90%. I'm not saying I'm going to lay 8-1 odds on Andrew or anything like that, but I'm just a little bit surprised because I don't see anything that suggests that Nihal would not be above 90%. But Smarter Chess has the numbers. I just have the guesswork. I don't actually have the ability to do the math.
No, I think it's actually, and Nihal taking his time here on move 2.
See if we can get the camera back up on the players. Is he having some sort of, it looks like his internet's okay. You know what's funny is if you have like an emergency restroom situation, you only have to last one more game before the break, but no, he's there.
Boy, do I have some stories about that. So finally he makes a move. Now this is a pivotal game in terms of the odds. Again, if Andrew wins this, 4 points is very much surmountable for him. If Nihal wins the 6-point lead, anything is possible, but this is really, I feel like could potentially be the match deciding game. So Andrew with the white pieces, we know how dangerous he is. We have sort of a symmetrical, queen a4 check there is a move. I'm not too familiar with this line. I think white is slightly better if he goes knight c3 as far as I know. And they do go into this endgame, but I'm sure Nihal is very well prepared, and it can be very frustrating when you're trying to win an endgame like this and you feel the advantage slipping away from you. Let's see whether Andrew will be able to put pressure. G3 is an interesting way to develop the bishop here. If Ian Kettering, it may be putting more pressure on black.
Another request in the chat for trivia that seems to be my main utility in commentating. I think I only have one question left, and besides, we can't ask trivia during the bullet. So I'll go ahead and my final trivia bullet here. This is probably the easiest question I'm going to ask you, but we asked all the players before the JSCC began, which player would you most like to have dinner with, past or present? So alive or not alive. I'm so used to saying kids shows. We don't say the word dead, but whatever.
Right.
Past or present. So Again, we couldn't quite get our questions to Andrew Tang in time because he just qualified. So I have the answer for Nihal. Type it in the chat. Who do you think Nihal Sarin would most like to have dinner with? You're probably not going to be surprised by the answer, which is the biggest hint I can give you.
That's interesting. I could take this in various directions. I could see it being Vishy. I could see it being Fischer. I could see it being Gary. I mean, there's so many mouthwatering guests you could have at the dinner table. One guy I personally would love is Mikhail Tal, who was an incredible just character in addition to being, of course, a legendary chess player. But I'm very curious, Mike. I actually don't know.
Can I give you my favorite Mikhail Tal quote?
Please do.
When he was told about a Soviet-era plan to eradicate alcoholism, Mikhail Tal said, "The state against vodka, I'll be on the side of vodka." And of course, that was part of his undoing, but what an amazing player. And we might not see a player that creative again, because you could simply do stuff back then that's not possible today. I mean, Bador Jobova and Grishuk, and they're all trying their best, Richard Rapport, but Mikhail Tal will always be the industry standard for creative chess. Nezhmetinov too, but I think Mikhail Tal, he did it with success more than any other player.
Exactly, and he's always been my idol, as I've tried to go crazy a couple times, but he's a legend, and one of those people who was a man of the world. He had so many interests and very well read, and there's an interview with him that has English subtitles from the late 80s toward the end of his life, and he shares some fascinating insights into his life and stories, and you just got to cherish people like that and what they have brought to the table.
And there's a trick here. If rook b1, I think knight takes b2 might be the idea.
Rook takes b2, and then you take, and it is a fork. Now, castles is possible, yep. And you avoid that because then the king can take. Definitely Andrew with the edge. He has fianchettoed his bishop, which makes it very hard for black's bishop to develop without giving up a pawn. Maybe black needs to part ways with that pawn. Anyway, rook d4, definite pressure being put by Andrew. Nihal also with 30 seconds on his clock. So this is looking good in the early going here for Andrew, as he can bring his knight to c5 also.
Yeah, one of those rare times we actually castle right onto the open files. But again, you can't play chess on general rules. You have to take the demands of the position and see, what rule applies or needs to be broken. Black's got some development problems here with the b7 pawn being so weak.
Yeah, and also, White can consider bringing his rook into the game with rook hd1. White needs to be careful. His pawn structure, he's got a lot of pawn islands. His pawn structure isn't great. So, and bishop b8 here would be possible, by the way, and then maybe drop the bishop back to c7. That seems rather mouthwatering. But he doesn't have to. He can also just double rooks. And as we've discussed, he's got to make the decision quickly, keep that time advantage. I do like rook hd1 because then you could bring the rook to the 8th rank, and black's pieces are in a lot of trouble. The bishop and the knight are both undefended. He does just that. We all know the quote, "The threat is stronger than its execution," so you keep bishop b8 in your back pocket. You could play bishop b8 even here, and if rook takes b8, there's a back rank mate. This is just for show. I don't think that it's actually any good.
Could have played bishop b8 in the last move and then gone back to f4. I once, going back to Gregory Kaidanov, he once taught a 2-hour class about why you should always repeat once. Now, I never knew that you could give 2 hours of reasons, but he did it. And I'm not belittling it. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
No, Kaidanov's lectures are amazing. I had such a good time in the U.S. chess school taught by Kaidanov. He's awesome.
He's a good guy and a great teacher, and his life story is amazing. Confirmed, this is the final game of the 3 minutes. So if Nihal Sarin manages to win, he's not winning, but if he manages to win, he will go into the bullet with the most insurmountable lead that anybody's ever come back from. But he looks like he is losing, and
here we go. A big win for Andrew, bringing the lead to 4 points. It is still a very big lead. An amazing performance by Nihal in the 3-minute portion, as our score is officially 10 points for Nihal, 6 for Andrew, as the 3-minute portion concludes. What a turnaround here. What a performance by Nihal. But Andrew winning the last game, and he gives himself, at least, Mike, a fighting chance.
Yeah, he wins 2 out of the last 3. He stood up right away, and I actually saw Nihal either talking to himself a little bit or shaking his head up and down. Maybe somebody in the room was just confirming what the score is. So 4 points is still going to be an unbelievably tall order when you're playing the #1 seed, but at least we still have a match. And if there's one thing that Andrew Tang is synonymous with, it is bullet. And so he's walking right into his best discipline.
Indeed, he is. We have 30 minutes of bullet coming up for you. We will see whether Andrew can find it in himself to mount an incredible comeback, or whether Nihal will deliver the hammer blow. But first, we're going to refill our coffees, and the players will refill theirs. We will go on a short break. And when we come back, 30 minutes of bullet as the final portion of this incredible match is upon us. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Junior Speed Chess Championship brought to you by Chess Kid. We have the final portion, the bullet portion of Nihal Sarin versus Andrew Tang, an amazing match coming our way very shortly. But first, let's walk through a couple of details. First and foremost, let's take another quick look at the bracket, Mike, and see what mouthwatering matchups we have coming up. Starting tomorrow, I believe, with Grandmaster Raunak Sadwani competing tomorrow. So, Mike, any thoughts about what we see here on the bracket?
Not to correct you, but I believe on my schedule it says Aragasi is playing Gukesh tomorrow.
Yeah, my bad. It is Aragash against Gukesh.
You're right. The winner of this match will play Smirnov versus Sadwani. And by the way, whenever that match happens, we have the most adorable picture of Smirnov when he was 5 years old. So you're going to want to tune into that match just to watch that picture. But tomorrow, exact same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, 5 p.m. UK, 7 p.m. for my friends in Vilnius. You will see Aragasi against Gukesh, another great match. And then if you really are up late in Australia and you want to watch your boy Smirnov play Sadwani, you have to wait till September 23rd. But we've got a month-long action of the best juniors in the world, so a lot to look forward to.
Absolutely. And to take another quick look at our statistical prediction, we have Sarin predicted to win the final against Sam Sevin. We see here a very impressive performance thus far in this match. So he is indeed making a case for himself. But we know how unpredictable things can be. Every single one of these matches is going to be so incredibly close. And they are not just playing for honor. They are also playing for very serious prizes. As we remind ourselves quickly, the winner of the whole thing gets a cool $2,500 and a ticket to the coveted Speed Chess Championship itself. But we see everyone gets a prize, 500, 750 for the winner of round 2 guaranteed. Incredible prizes, and we see the players putting their blood, sweat, and tears on the line for every one of these matches. As we transition back, and we will have liftoff any second on 30 minutes of 1+1, and a Herculean task, Mike, awaits Andrew, who has to surmount a 4-point lead that Nihal Sarin currently has. And Nihal is also one of the greatest bullet players in the world.
Yeah, he dug himself a big hole with about a 30 or 40-minute stretch of substandard chess, or at least results-wise, where Nihal got that big lead by winning 6.5 out of 7. You take that away, and Andrew's actually got a small lead in the match. Andrew got himself back in the match by winning 2 out of 3 to close out the 3-minute segment. He has a 4-point deficit. His biggest deficit was actually 5, and that has been surmounted before in a previous match of this ilk several years ago. So everything to be decided. And even if things get mathematically out of his hands, you're still playing for prize money because the margin of victory does matter for all of our matches.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these matches so fascinating. And just to remind you, we will play, even if the match is decided, every game is played in the allotted time limit, because part of the prize is determined, of course, by the match score. So buckle in for 30 minutes of action. And here we go with yet another kind of ready structure. And Andrew has got to play for a win with black, with white. He cannot afford to kind of trade baskets, right? He's got to get some black games here as well.
Exactly. No time for an analysis board either. Everything's going to be shown live. We probably will expect at least 8 bullet games. Sometimes you see as many as 9 or 10. But the players are so fast, though, that can actually elongate the games because they can play 90 or 100 move games because they're so good with that 1-second increment. So I wouldn't expect too many. What I'm trying to say is I think Andrew needs to think about going 6-2. I think 6-2 is the number you shoot for, and then you hope for the best in a tie break. I'll need a refresher on the rules. Do we go straight to Armageddon, or do we play a couple of 1+1 games?
I have a feeling we play a couple of 1+1 games, but we'll get that confirmed by the production crew. But I think if Andrew even gets the tie break, he'll be euphoric and he'll cross that bridge when he gets there. Yeah. So we have confirmed we have 4 more games of 1+1 in the event of a tie. And if that is also tied, then we go into an Armageddon match.
But 5+3. But we're just basically, we're letting you know because it will happen at some point in the next month. It may not happen today.
Right. And exactly. So we have Andrew with a nice position here, but again, 20 seconds. He has let his clock dip. And we know he's not afraid of that. But against Nihal, Nihal knows exactly how to pose problems. He's playing a lot faster. We have h6, g5. Now, white doesn't have a knight to stick on h5 this time, but Nihal closing up the position and preparing a queenside pawn storm. This has gone a little bit south here for Andrew. I like Nihal's position and very little time remaining on the clock. Easy play for white as he begins to attack the queenside.
Black gearing up for e5. I think black would have preferred to play d takes c4 a long time ago and try to play against the hanging pawns, but I guess he did not like the space advantage that white conferred. He gets his e5 in, but here comes the passer, and rook takes is not allowed because of bishop b5 with the world's worst pin/skewer, depending on your Russian language terminology of all time.
Exactly. And now that pawn on c6, like a splinter, and Andrew trying to retool his pieces, this looking very, very bad now. He's got to make Nihal use some of his clock, which he is. Does he take on e5 and expose that d5 pawn is the key question. Rook to e3,
Bishop
swinging
a3.
His rook. Ah, what an idea. Rook to e3. Andrew going after this pawn on c6, but now all of his resources are tied down. But what does Nihal do? Bishop a6. Wow. And now bishop takes c8. He's won an exchange. The game far from over, though. Andrew has a pawn and a piece. He's trying to activate his queen, but he gives up d5. This is looking very, very rough. Now a full exchange up for very little compensation. Andrew's got to whip something up, but nothing seems to be on the cards. His bishops are simply too passive. a5. Now a6 is hanging. The rook can come into c7. Nihal going for a queen trade. Look how carefully he's converting. That king is perfectly safe. It has the h2 square. This seems to be essentially over, barring some sort of a miraculous blunder by Nihal.
One of those weird positions where you have just enough thought that you could make a comeback where you don't resign, but it's going to cost you 30 more seconds of match clock. And there he goes. He finally resigns.
In a 5-point game, now basically must-win territory, truly must-win territory for Andrew. There is enough time, 26 minutes left. They will get at least 5 games in, probably more. But every game needs to be a golden performance now for Andrew. He took too much time there, Mike, I think.
Yeah, my prediction would be 7 more, but that means you got to go 6-1.
So there is a little bit of margin, but not much.
Yeah, as we said, Crush against Kazintseva would be the model comeback that we're looking for, where Crush won the final 4 bullet games to, I think, beat Kazintseva in the playoff. But the point is, you don't really want to rest your hopes on having to run the table. We would call that dormy in golf. You don't want to end up dormy as black, where you have to run out to be able to survive.
Right, and it seems that Andrew isn't doing very much to win this game. He's simply worse than an endgame. I think he blundered something there. Now, just to remind the fans here, we are not rooting against Nihal, but simply, obviously, we do want to see intrigue. So it does not come out of a bias, but rather because, we obviously are always looking for a comeback. But not to take anything away from Nihal's performance so far, which has been absolutely incredible. To have such a score against a bullet and blitz wizard such as Andrew is a very, very impressive performance indeed.
We had a quick splash of the real-time odds, still exactly 86% for Nihal. Quite mysterious to me because he was at 86% about an hour ago with the same 5-minute margin. You would think the same margin with less time on the match clock would make his odds go up, but the point is 86%. So however those numbers are derived, but the point is I still think it should be above 90%, like I thought the first time.
Indeed. And wow, I'm just impressed that Nihal is holding his own here in the bullet. This is going to be a dead draw, which of course favors Nihal. He wants to bleed as much clock as possible, take that pawn away. Otherwise, it goes to h6. Tricky move by Andrew, but not good enough. And yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be a draw. Now, one thing I would try to do if I were now, maybe Andrew is now worse. By the way, he's down 2 pawns, Mike. This other rook coming into d2. Now he's the one who has to make a draw. And he wants to do that as quickly as possible, trying to give himself as much time as possible to continue the match.
So frustrating because you have to burn another minute of match clock and just hope for the draw. Now, I've heard of people saying in situations like this, probably not this situation, but that you should just go ahead and resign. But mathematically, that loses another half point that you have to recover, which takes time to recover. So I don't actually believe there's really any scenario where you should try to resign a drawn position to save match clock. It seems very unlikely to me that you could ever want to do that. Mate, threat on the board.
But rook d8, I was going to say, now wait a minute. That was a very tricky idea by Andrew, but Nihal finding the defense here. Look at how carefully he is defending. He doesn't mind a draw, but I would go for it. Yeah, and the reason he's doing this is because he can simply bleed another minute off the clock. With that increment, He can also, there's nothing wrong with it. He's not doing anything dirty. He's trying to win this position, which is, by the way, not an easy draw. And h5 wins the game. Andrew blundering h5, and this is disaster, as he will lose this one as well. And double whammy as Nihal burns more and more time. Mike, this is the kind of territory where I would already consider resigning, because actually saving this objectively is going to be very hard.
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not get to see the king in 2 versus king in 1 technique. So white was correct. If your goal is to try to draw, to keep the rooks on the board, because at least you can check and maybe create some confusion. But you're right, it's ultimately lost. And that would make it 6 match point margin, which would be of historic proportions if white was attempting to make a comeback, white being Andrew Tang.
Indeed. Now, I may have spoken too soon. Andrew trying to kind of tie his rook to that pawn on e6. Is he going to hold this together at this point? It's not quite a moot point, but rook e2, so he's trying his best, but does h2 win? Black's idea to give up that h pawn for the e pawn, and that is a theoretical win if it happens. I don't see a defense here for Andrew, because now rook e1, you take e3, he resigns, 6-point lead for Nihal, and now with 22 minutes left, he's got to score a couple miniatures.
And although nobody's really been asking, I did leave you hanging on the last trivia question. Nihal wants to have dinner with Vishy. I mean, was he really allowed to say anything else? I mean, first of all, I don't think he's just saying it. Vishy really has that kind of stature in the Indian chess world. In fact, he's not the only player to give the answer Vishy. We'll release those as future matches come out. But here we see a crippling of Black's pawn structure.
The roof has come off.
Is Andrew a player that goes on tilt, or is it I can't even say his decision.
He does. I mean, everybody does at some point when the frustration reaches a boiling point. I think he's a lot less prone to tilt than most. And even Andrew's tilt is, not comparable to tilt of other players. Myself included, I'm capable of playing like h4 and a4 and move 1 and just slam stuff. For Andrew, maintains a cool head, but sometimes there's this middle ground between tilt and frustration where you're not outwardly tilted, but your quality of play goes down as you're another bad position, another blunder. You get into these loops. And I think here we see one of them. Look at Nihal's 3365 rating. I mean, that is not a fluke. That is how well this guy plays. This is, again, spiraling out of control as Andrew losing some pawns. The king side incredibly weak as well.
Wow, 3365. That's not a chess rating. That's a Rush song. That is just amazing to get your rating up that high. Another mate threat on the board, but queen g4 covers the bishop with check, and now we'll probably see, well, he's probably worried about g3 and then rook g8 or something like that.
Right, but then queen h5 may be threatening checkmate. Now that does create a pin, so something like this, the bishop cannot take the rook because of the pin on the queen. So black could play rook g7. Problem is, white's okay just having that position. So Andrew trying to go for tricks here, and he's succeeding. This is interesting now. But, ooh, the mate threat and the threat of the rook. Look at that. And Andrew loses this one. All of a sudden, the rook on c8 is hanging, and mate is threatened, and he resigns another one. And he resigns another one.
3 in a row for the South Indian superstar. And so far, Andrew not able to show his best form in the discipline that he ostensibly is best known for.
Yeah, and now, we talked about this in the beginning of the match, Mike. How much do you think the increment has impacted this match in retrospect?
That's a great question. I mean, definitely in the 5-minute segment, the players were playing in such a way where the increment was important because they were willing to bleed their clock below a minute, still in complicated middle games. So I guess the genesis of your question is, how differently would they have played the slower time control without the increment? I don't have a great answer for you. So I'd like to turn this one back on you because I actually don't know enough about the players to say how they would have played differently in the 5-minute.
I think some of the time scrambles would have probably gone Andrew's way. I think he's still marginally better in that. So that, I think, favored Nihal. But again, it's always interesting to me how something ostensibly small can really create a big impact or not. So
knight takes h3?
Oh,
knight takes h3?
Indeed. In queen h1, so he snaps the pawn off the board. Now white's king again very weak. b5, well then there would follow knight a5. But definitely Nihal once again in the driver's seat. As Andrew's London is on fire. h5, h4 is another idea here to try to get this bishop on g3 off the board and weaken white's king side further.
Going back to your question, adding the 1 sacrament, Chess is basically a game. When you reduce the time control, you're adding sport and you're lessening science, right? Like, we could have the most accurate game of chess ever played if we gave the players 24 hours per game. So adding the increment basically says, we already know these matches are played incredibly fast to make them more sport, but we're adding a little bit of science because we want players to be able to convert winning endgames. And we don't want people sacrificing their queen for no reason to nullify a pre-move to win by a half a second.
Right.
So I appreciate the increment for that reason, because we're not judging reflexes. We're still trying to judge chess. And the balance for me is perfect with the 1 second increment.
I think that's a fair point, and I think that we like the time scrambles, and we have them. It's not that 1 second increment eliminates it. By the way, I think you invented a word. Did you say sacrament? Because that's like a second and increment. I like that word. That's like what do they call it? Portmanteau.
Yeah, I think I sometimes. I think I have a speech impediment sometimes when I'm speaking, because I'm trying to say things as quickly as you're moving them on the board. I'm just trying to keep up with you.
No, I feel you completely. It can be tough, but I actually like that. So I agree. We see the time scrambles, but we also see very, very high quality chess. Even in the bullet, as we see Nihal this way and that way, he is feeling out white's kingside. F5 is on deck, and that is just going to destroy the last line of defense here. Bishop takes F3 to follow if the knight moves potentially. This is not looking good once again for Andrew. And, sometimes when it rains, it pours, it can be tough to watch. It can be tough on a player when it seems like nothing is going right. So, one has to just feel Andrew's pain here. But with that being said, Nihal is playing just a fantastic match.
With every move, black is giving white something to worry about, and white has not gotten a chance to get his pawns mobile. Those pawns are sitting there and not bothering black in the least, and the black pieces are either making a check, a capture, or a threat virtually every turn.
Exactly. And another threat, there was a check, bishop b2 being threatened. Andrew is defending this really well, though. He is up a lot of pawns, but the attack still rages on. 1 second, though, for Nihal. Let's see if Andrew can score. Oh, and he gives the rook. And another one bites the dust here. Andrew defending very well. He's trying to get in with his queen, but now everything, the roof comes off. Another knight and everything is captured here. Now a bear king, and Andrew resigns. Another victory resounding by Nihal as he inches toward 3,400 bullet. That is incredible.
Pretty amazing stuff. An 8-point match lead. Mathematically, it's going to be, well, I don't know what kind of math I can invent to make this work. We're going to have to like, what's that kind of chess where we're going to make it like the 3-point contest where the final couple games are worth 2 points or something. We'd have to change the scale, but they are playing for money. It's real money. It's a split of $500. So right now it's 2-1. It looks like $333 extra for Nihal and $166 for Andrew. Wait, it's not 2-1. It's 14-6. Okay, Andrew, please win this game so the math becomes easy.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, this is, and by the way, okay, so queen b2 here, Nihal again, look at the pressure that he puts with every move. You brought this up in the last game, Mike. There is just this sense that he's playing with, as my coach would say, playing with energy. Every move creates a threat, creates problems. Now there's problems on the c file and on the diagonal. He's threatening bishop takes c6. This is actually a crushing move. And he's threatening bishop takes g7. Amazing. So all of a sudden, in such a peaceful looking position, we've seen him do this a lot of times, all of a sudden creating what seems to be insurmountable problems. Now bishop f1 attacking the queen, g7 is going to fall, and that is going to be what seems to be virtually another crushing blow. Wow.
Yeah, in fact, it might be 2 pawns after bishop h8 because you have to play queen g6. You're right. Yeah.
But then rook c7 might come in perhaps. So bishop h6, he does something similar. Now I would just drop the bishop back to f4, sit on my extra pawn and the weak king. The rook can come into c7. Queen to a3. Look at the bishop on f1, sort of anchoring the king side completely. h5, Andrew trying what he can, but I think white can go after the pawns now, and then at his leisure play h4.
And a lot of pride in Andrew's game here, being such a good bullet player. I'm sure he wants to scoop up some wins, not just for the extra lunch money, but to remind people of how good he is in bullet. Rook c8, first move that comes to my mind here.
Completely agree. I think that's a great move. Forcing the trade of rooks. Queen a4, though, I think he's prioritizing stopping h4 as the queen controls that square. And you're absolutely right. Andrew is a legendary bullet player. I think he's a little bit off today in some regards, but yeah, as another pawn collapses, rook a5 can now be met with queen e8 check, saving the bishop. So 3 pawns now for Nihal. Wow.
I do think this was good for Nihal's ultimate tournament chances by being tested in this opening round. I know that the final score won't reflect it, but don't forget, he was down for much of the 5-minute. And it wasn't until the transition to the 3-minute where he started to open up a lead. So I think that's nice. Now, I want to question you. I know the matches were played a couple of days ago, but do you think Andrew, he's 20 years old, could he possibly be a little bit fatigued? Or are these players so used to playing so much internet chess that 3 matches several days ago has no impact on a Friday match today?
Well, to answer your question, I think fatigue is one of those things from experience that strikes when you don't really you don't feel it on a surface level. You think, I'm pumped, I got some sleep, I feel good, but then you look at your play and you can just sort of see the signs of tiredness, and you see the sort of occasional uncharacteristic blunder. So it's a very insidious threat, and that's the scary thing about it. You just sort of, the adrenaline seems to replace. It seems to make you feel like you're awake and alive, but it's just inevitable. These processes that wear you down, they just kind of take place whether you like it or not. So I absolutely think that is an issue. I also think Andrew is incredibly resilient. He plays so many of these incredibly long matches that take hours and hours. So he's pretty much primed for that. But these are some very, very high stakes matches, and it can be hard to maintain the same level for sure.
By the way, in the opening game, we never got to actually show people why e4 did not work for White. White actually had a second chance to play it, but again, it didn't happen. Now, the difference between this and I believe the very first game is that White played rook c1 before the black queen even got to c2. Not that queen c2 was winning, but it certainly was complicated for White to figure out what to do with that queen. So that's the main difference between this and the opening round game.
Good point, indeed. And now a solid position for Andrew, but it is also for Nihal. Again, we see that weakness of the king side. And in Bullet, I've always felt, Mike, that when you make a weakness on your king side, that's always accentuated. And it's not a particularly deep point. It's just harder to defend in Bullet. So like every little deficiency can be amplified because of the just limited time you have to defend.
Congratulations to all the fans of Nihal Sarin. I bet you're still up in the chat. It's almost 1 a.m. in India. So thank you for not Netflixing and chilling and instead watching the end of your countrymen. Nihal Sarin is going to take this opening round match. The question is, by what score and by how much money? And could he possibly have a perfect bullet against Andrew Tang? I mean, that would be a feather in your cap to be able to say that you ran the tables in the bullet against Andrew Tang.
Indeed, and this game looking good for Nihal again, despite his time deficit. Look at his pieces, all of them playing bishop b4, rook e4. He's going to double rooks if that happens. Andrew's king is also under fire. And indeed, for Nihal, playing very late, continuing to maintain such a high level is just incredibly impressive. Bishop c7 going after the pawns. Now, what's the pawn count? I think Andrew is technically up a pawn, but he's going to lose it. I think f4 is going to be captured. This does look defensible for White, but boy, is it, wow. If Nihal runs the table on the bullet, that will be just an unbelievably impressive feat against Andrew.
He is down 2-1 as far as time, so I seriously doubt it will happen because even after this game, we've got at least 3 more. I mean, how can you put your money on Andrew losing 3 or 4 bullet games in a row, regardless of what's happened to this point? But we'll see. I guess that'd be as close as chess comes to like a perfect game in baseball or something.
Right. And I think this one, I think Andrew does have a chance with 3 seconds of the clock for Nihal, though his pawns are very, very concerning. Okay, this might be a draw, actually. I mean, it starts to liquidate. Pawn on h4, though, you have to defend it. Maybe rook h2. He gives it away. Okay, so he gives it away, but he activates his pieces. I think Nihal might just force a draw here. I mean, there's really no need, unless he is trying to whitewash Andrew. Yep, and a draw agreed. So there we have it. What a disappointment, Mike. Nihal, I mean, this is ridiculous. A draw. Wow. I mean, terrible performance.
To show you
didn't adopt Andrew? Come on.
To show you what, I don't think 16-year-olds can adopt. They're not of legal age. To show you what kind of fighting match we've had, only the 3rd draw in 22 games. You've only had 1 draw in each of the 3 time controls. That's pretty low when it comes to we'll call it deathmatch standards. I'm showing my age when I use the term deathmatch. We haven't had an official deathmatch in about 2 or 3 years, but yeah, 19 of the 22 games have been decisive, and unluckily for the Minnesotan, or I should say the Minnesotan, the young player from Kerala is doing well.
Absolutely, he is, and we've seen him repeating with great success this particular type of line where he gets either one or both bishops, ready structure, and he starts to harass Black's pawn center, as we see Andrew trying to counteract his activity by deploying his queen, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn. But yeah, so now a decision to be made by Nihal as he defends both at the same time, guarding his bishop. But we'll see if Andrew is able to score an honor goal or two, as we are down to 8 minutes left in this incredible matchup. And Mike, I'm just so excited. This is only the beginning. We have so many more awesome matches to come. So I'm really just excited to be here and to be commentating. And hopefully we've still got we've got thousands of you still watching, whether it's late in India. We really appreciate it. So big shout out to all of the fans cheering on Nihal and Andrew here as we enter the final stages of the match.
And in the most self-deprecating comment of the day, I could say that if I was Nihal here, I could even win this match. And I say that because you could literally let your 1 minute expire on the next 5 or 6 games, run the match clock down to 0, and still win comfortably. But they are playing for money. They're playing for pride. All of India is still watching. So thank you for not watching Jay Leno or whatever the up at night late Indian version of that show is. And we've got some tricks on G7 here.
We do. Bishop G7 here is really strong, followed by Queen G4, and then Bishop on G7 will be independent. Knight takes G7, preserving his bishop. That is equally as good. Double whammy there with the rook. Knight E8 is possible, as is Knight H5. Look at this knight swinging around it. Knights at close quarters like this, with the king being exposed, are so dangerous. And we see it here. Andrew will have to give up his rook, I think, for knight. Queen G4 followed by Queen C8 is possible. Rook E1 is also possible, involving the rook as he does. Impossible to defend this with 3 seconds. Queen G4 check. Ooh, and he's got Queen G4 and rook takes E7. Sacking the queen for mate. Let's see if he finds it. He does. Andrew running with his king, taking on E6. He goes for the business approach, just extending the attack. Look how many threats there are. Okay. Bishop F6, but Andrew holding on. He's still holding on, but the problem is Nihal is also up a pawn. So even if the attack quote-unquote fails, we'll no longer look at Andrew escaping to E8. He's extending this game.
Yeah, you always have this hope of playing F5, knight moves bishop D6. Okay, he's going about it a different way, but he was trying to get his bishop to C7.
And Nihal sort of simplifying, but now Andrew's up a pawn. Or no, it's still equal. So he was up 2 pawns, actually. So this is still better for white because of the weak black king. Nihal recovers one of the extra pawns, and another one of those situations where he can play this for an hour and bleed clock. Not that he needs to do that because of how overwhelming the match score already is.
Yeah, 5 minutes remaining in this match, so we'll see a few more games after this. And if you trade queens, the players can pretty much shake hands right away, which could happen right here.
Yep. And despite the extra pawn, of course, we know opposite colored bishops greatly increase the drawing tendencies. Not always. There are exceptions to the rule, but here black's king is in the right place, and white just doesn't have enough to make the draw. And they will agree any second. Bishop can simply tie itself to the pawn on B7, and no progress is possible.
Yeah, and sometimes you're so caught up in the middle of the match, you're not even thinking. We've heard players before say that the idea of milking the clock didn't even enter their head because they're just so caught up in the moment. Or that even though it's completely legal, they don't believe in it, that they view it as unsportsmanly. I once played an over-the-board tournament as a kid where my opponent at the beginning of the game got sick and had to go to the restroom. And I went up to the tournament director and I asked him, am I supposed to stop the clock because my opponent is sick? Now, the tournament director happened to be our D&D master for Dungeons and Dragons. His answer was, well, that depends, Mike. Are you chaotic evil or lawful good? And actually, it was a perfect answer because there's no rule that says you have to, although some people would view it as sportsmanly. However, I would argue in internet chess, not that there's a lessening of morals, but that the clock is such a part of the game that using it in any way legally to your advantage is above board.
Completely agree with you, Mike. I think that there is sort of like a border, there's stuff that is questionable, but I agree. I think that you can allow yourself more online than over the board. And I think that there is a general acceptance of that among players. I think that they usually don't take objection to these kinds of things. And players have different views on this. Some are more into flagging, some are less, but there is a spectrum. And I think that usually, I always think that when a player does anything to win, it can be obnoxious, but usually it's a sign of respect in the sense that he really, really wants to win. So he values the opponent so much that he will do anything to beat him, so it's important for him to win. So it can be thought of that way as well. Not that, there can't be obnoxious behavior. There absolutely can.
Magical Wizard 01 says that he or she cannot see the score because it's restricted and he or she is on his school computer. Now, I don't know how you're accessing the chat. I'm very proud of you, but also a little concerned as a former in-school educator that you are skipping school, but you're probably at home. I actually don't know what's going on in the schooling world, but let me just tell you, Magical Wizard, it's 16-7 in favor of Nihal Sarin against Andrew Tang. We've got 2 minutes left. It's possible this is our final game, but they'd have to play a lot of moves. Probably we'll see one more after this.
Yeah. And we have actually Andrew mounting a tremendous attack here against Nihal's king. Nihal trying to trade queens. You can consider even a sack on f6. Now, the problem here for Andrew is, okay, he trades queens, but the endgame is completely winning. Look at his pieces massing together there on the king side. But yeah, I mean, crazy stuff going on right now, but we appreciate people finding the time. Not that I advocate doing this instead of paying attention in class. I would never do such a thing, Mike. I would never encourage people to procrastinate by watching chess.
And in order to figure out who is going to be the next star of the chess world in 10 years, that's Chess Kid's job. Chess Kid's job is to get more kids playing chess so we can eventually see them on Chess.com. And if any of you out there are educators or parents, you're involved in your school PTA, you're a principal, wait a minute, are you a superintendent of a district? If you are, please email schools@chesskid.com. We will make sure that every kid in your district is able to get access to chess. And here's what I want to see. I want to see rook b7 followed by a3, bishop, rook b4 mate.
Oh, look at you. And he goes for a slightly different mating net, but this is as effective because he is going to pick off that knight whole and now take all of Black's pawns. And Nihal, so this is over. Now, again, I think you're doing awesome work with Chess Kid, and I'm very passionate about the cause of bringing chess to everyone. I think it helps in ways that perhaps people don't realize. Now, you know a lot more about this than I do, Mike, but to me, people always try to measure, does chess make you better at math scores? But I think chess builds so many skills that are not always quantifiable by a test.
I agree. So many kids grow up playing team sports and they have to win or lose, but they can always sort of diminish a win or a loss based on teammates. But in chess, you're all out there by yourself. You got to fix all the problems yourself. And you did some great work in the Bay Area. We're happy to have you as the resident grandmaster at the Charlotte Chess Center. And that game was finished with 14 seconds left. So it is, I'm not going to call it bonus chess, but we should be able to squeeze one more game in because there was definitely time on the clock. And Andrew gets his first win in the bullet right in the penultimate game.
Indeed, and a very good game there with an attack, keeping his cooms cool. Now we will, I think that the players are probably not aware the time has not expired yet. Now we'll see. It looks like they might actually be done. Let's see. They definitely, there was time remaining. Okay, they are done. So it looks like the players have agreed to end the match here and a score of 16-8 in favor of Grandmaster Nihal Sarin, who defeats Grandmaster Andrew Tang. So what a match by Nihal, winning all of the sections. Incredible show as things somehow got out of control for Andrew by the 3-minute section.
Nice to see him come. Yeah, nice to see him come back there, though. I feel good for him that he was able to win that final game. Now, he's done like 100-game bullet matches against Magnus, so I'm sure he doesn't need the pat on the back. I'm sure that would feel a little bit like I was some sort of avuncular commentator.
Indeed.
Yeah, so I think we're going to just stay right here as we're getting the interview, or are we going on break?
I think we're going on a very short break, and when we return, we will have these two gladiators for you, and we will have some questions, and we will have the interview. So very quick break, and we will be right back. Don't go anywhere. We have a really interesting interview coming right up. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Grandmasters Nihal Sarin and Andrew Tang here for you for a quick interview right after the match. Nihal, congratulations on your victory. Fantastic play. There was a point in the match when things kind of turned around and you won quite a lot of games. Was it sort of a conscious change? Did you sort of change your approach as the 5-minute section drew to a close, or did you feel like you sort of just got more warmed up? Walk us through how you felt throughout the match.
Yeah, the match was very close throughout, and the 5 minutes was very tough for me somehow. And Andrew was playing extremely well and very fast. And yeah, at some point, I was just trying to not get so angry. At some point, it just started going well for me, and yeah, then it was good.
Now, Nihal, a few days ago, when you saw that Andrew Tang won the knockout by winning all those matches, and you found out he would be your opponent, you could make the argument that this is the toughest 1 versus 16 matchup ever for the 1 seed. What were your thoughts when you found out that Andrew Tang would be your opponent?
Yeah, it was. I knew it was going to be very tough, and Andrew is, of course, very fast and strong, and yeah, I'm a big fan of him. Bullet.
I see you smiling, Andrew. Did you know he was a fan of yours?
I mean, we've played many games, but that's flattering.
What about those 3 matches you had to win in the knockout to get here, Andrew? I don't think a 20-year-old would be tired out by matches, especially when you had several days. It's not like you played them yesterday, but was there any fatigue from those matches?
I don't think so. If anything, it's like early in the morning. I just haven't quite woken up yet. But,
that makes sense. Are you surprised that you did better in the 5-minute? I mean, I'm sure you went into today thinking you would win. Everybody would, but you know, your results were better in the 5-minute. Do you think that's an underappreciated part of your game?
Yeah, I think, okay, I'm not so bad at blitz, but of course I expect to do better when the time is lower. So yeah.
Well, Well, you played very, very well. One final question for you, Nihal. Do you sort of prepare very intensely for these matches, or do you kind of keep a clear head? Where on the spectrum do you lie?
Um, I don't prepare so hard for these matches, but I do check a bit. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, after the Olympiad, I just can't prepare any.
Mm-hmm. Fair
And
enough.
actually,
Well,
I hate to ask you a gotcha question, but Danya and I, see, Danya seems to think that if we had a competition on world capitals, that he might be the favorite. But Nihal, I don't know if this is verifiable. Your Wikipedia page says that you knew 190 capitals and country flags by the time you were 3. Now, first of all, is that true, or is Wikipedia being a little bit generous with that?
Um, I don't exactly know. When I was very young, maybe I knew a lot, but now I don't know even half of it.
Oh, you don't know half. Okay, so
unacceptable.
probably
All
it's
right.
not fair to give you a gotcha question. Then we were going to quiz you with a couple of countries, but we'll maybe pass on that. So
Yeah, well, both of you have earned your rest. Thank you so much, Nihal and Andrew, for a fantastic match. Congratulations to you, Nihal, and best of luck in your remaining matches. And great play, Andrew. So thanks to both of you. You've definitely earned your rest.
yeah, you've both acquired a bunch of fans, and Nihal, I think your entire country can go to sleep right now. I'm sure that they're all. We did not lose any fans, even though you were pulling away. So I know it's 1 o'clock in India, but congratulations to the entire country of India, because you still have 5 representatives in the Chess Kid Junior Speed Chess Championship. All 5 are still alive. So thanks to you both for an exciting match, and I'm sure that a lot of you have gained a lot of people's respect, and we're going to see a lot more of you, because both of you guys, I mean, you're still too young to, I don't know, to do most things in life. Your future's very bright. So happy to have you guys here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as that amazing match comes to an end, we will just quickly remind you of the epic matches still to come. And tomorrow, I believe, and I got this wrong once, but I think we have Arjun Erigaisi against Gukesh, 2 incredibly strong young Indian players. That will be coming your way same time, 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. So that will be tomorrow, a great way to kick off the weekend. But what a match it was today, an amazing performance by Nihal. Mike, any final thoughts on your end as we just forecast the predicted match, and Nihal 1 step closer to actually fulfilling that?
I'll just say I'm going to go ahead and ruin every chess fan's complete weekend by saying that Sunday, the next American up is Sam Sevian against Amin Tabatabai, who's a player who I've only come to know in the last year. So that's going to be an amazing one as well. My weekend is ruined because I know I'm going to watch both of these, even if I'm outside. So great stuff today. Very exciting 5-minute section. And our Smarter Chess predictions that Nihal Sarin will be the predicted winner. The funny thing about this prediction is if you're a 60% favorite in each match, mathematically, that does not necessarily mean you'll win at all. And I'm not going to get into the problem of statistics, but Nihal does survive and move on to the second round, and he will play the winner of the Smirnov-Radwani match. So I'm excited about all of the month to come of all the other junior speed chess championship players, and happy that Chess Kid is here to help bring it to you.
Absolutely. Well, this was an incredible match. I had just a blast. All of the sections were competitive. Nihal taking it away as the 3-minute section began. And as we come to an end, just wanted to say a very, very big shout out and thank you to the thousands of people watching across platforms and participating and cheering on the respective players. And Mike, it was a pleasure to commentate with you as well. The time just flew by.
Thanks, Danya. We will now parry Zagruska and get ready for the match tomorrow.
Absolutely. See everyone later. Stay safe and see you tomorrow.